I'm needed. None of us wants to repeat stuff. Bigger than ever. They're giving excellent notes. Misinformation like that. Skinny Man, Mavic Chen. We showed those audition tapes to the BBC and to Disney. Their dynamic is childlike in some ways, like two schoolgirls gossiping in the corner. It takes a while to get the empire into shape, but that's the serious plan. Annual Doctor Who, no gap years, lots of content on and on. Those are just some samples of key quotes and interviews from Russell T Davies and the whole RTD2 team that we're going to look at today, as we discuss the continuing development of the second Doctor Who era of Russell T Davies. We're at an interesting vantage point of the era right now, as Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor's first series, Series 14, is being filmed, and David Tennant's 14th Doctor, well, his trilogy of 60th anniversary specials have been filmed, but his first story, the Liberation of the Daleks comic adventure, continues on in Doctor Who magazine. And perhaps the most pertinent quote from that is an utterance from a Dalek. Do not enter into discourse with the Doctor. So, entering into discourse with the Doctor today will be myself, Neo from Australia, along with my friends from England, Ingiga and Oliver. We'll be looking at various topics: the dissemination of information in Doctor Who fandom, why info spreads in certain ways and what effects that has. We'll look at RTDisney, that is, increasing clarity we have on Disney's role with the show, and a bunch of various thoughts on that. We'll look at the role RTD has when it comes to the show in the 2020s, and more clarity on how this second RTD Doctor Who era came to be, and we'll look at some RTDiscourse. Previously, we looked at Costume Gate, the controversy over RTD choosing to have Jodie Whittaker's 13th Doctor outfit melt away into a new David Tennant 14th Doctor outfit immediately during the regeneration, a change from how regenerations tend to go with the costumes, and all of RTD's interesting comments on his motivations with that choice and various fandom reactions to that. But this time we'll look at other discourses that have emerged since then, and also why these sorts of discussions happen and our general thoughts on their significance. And we'll chat about new cast reveals and set pictures, and Millie Gibson as the new companion Ruby Sunday, and the continuing 14th Doctor Liberation of the Daleks comic story as well. Firstly, Ingiga, what's changed since our early RTD2 days chat in November 2022, our This is the Future chat? What's new from this vantage point of January 2023?
Well, we've had clarity on a lot of things that were a bit more obscure last time we talked about it, I guess.
Oliver, is there anything else new now?
Sluggo. Big slug.
Yeah.
The big slug?
Big slug.
The hug slug?
Big hug slug.
Hug slug.
In November, we talked a bit about Disney, and things were still quite vague there, because there was a lot of Disney are making the show now. No, hush, hush. BBC own the show. Bad Wolf are making the show. There was a lot of confusion around who was making the show. And so the Disney discourse felt just kind of like a symptom of those kind of confusions. But we did have one little thing. We had Scott Hancock talking about Disney notes back when we had that This is the Future discussion in November. And that's evolved in a big way. There's actually plenty of specifics to talk about with Disney now. To start with, before we really get into the big RTDisney topic, I want to look at this kind of way info circles about. Every month, a specific thing happens, I find, in that what's a way information sprouts out every month?
Well, the thing is, before the magazine is read by everyone, it's read by a few people, and those few people take information from that magazine and post it for everyone else to look at. And then what happens there is that they may not accurately be summarising what's in the magazine.
That's exactly it, yeah. So every month we get a new Doctor Who magazine, at longest running TV tie-in magazine ever. It's always full of info, I always look forward to reading it, one way or the other. And this 586, the newest one, has got plenty of interesting stuff that we're going to discuss. That's all normal, that the magazine has loads of things to discuss. But the really interesting bit to me is this kind of liminal set of days we get every month before the magazine comes out, where, like Gig says, some people have got it, but it's not out digitally. Most people don't have access to the print one. Some people have it. Or, some bits of it are kind of gurgling and burbling up through the Twitter sphere or other places, and we start getting quotes taken out of context, or quotes just being plain misunderstood, selective quotes. You get little zoomed in photos of little bits of the magazine that, lack. I remember with Costume Gate, we had some of RTD's quotes on it that were getting shared around without the greater context. Do you remember that? And things are framed very differently if you're just looking at him like saying, so-and-so would be ridiculous to do without his like whole context of everything. So this happens every month. And what emotions do you guys have when that happens? What do you think of the kind of liminal pre-Doctor Who magazine press cycle thing?
Well, mirth would be one emotion that I associate with it.
I'm decently critical of RTD anyway, and I find it very frustrating that every month we get so bogged down in basically made-up nonsense. And I think there's plenty of actual stuff to critique, and instead we spend a week on made-up nonsense.
I think it's a fun bit of every month because it's almost like a little new Doctor Who episode in a way. It's like this new bit of Doctor Who related fiction that we fans all get to experience together. Yeah.
The RTD minisode.
The proverbial RTD minisode. So I think it's always very interesting what happens there. And so I thought we'd just zero in on a little example before we actually talk about the specific Disney and Discourse and everything else stuff. So I'm just going to use an example. Like, it's not just one account that does this. Tons of accounts do this, and I'm not saying it's malicious. A lot of the times people are just literally misreading it themselves, the magazine, or what they've heard secondhand, which, that happens. Sometimes people, can only imagine that people would be interested in one bit. And so, they're not like kind of maliciously trying to, if I clip out this bit, everyone's going to hate RTD. They're just, they're thinking as they're thinking. I'm not saying it's a malicious thing, like sometimes, sure, but not all the time. And sometimes people just plain don't get it. Like, they misunderstand themselves, and then they spread their misunderstanding out, and then everyone starts reacting to the misunderstanding. It's gorgeous. I love how this happens every month. But this case, get around 1,000 likes or whatever, get plenty of quote tweets. Sometimes it's much more than that. This sort of thing happens. And so I wanted to look at this specific example where, reading out one specific tweet, this is just an example of what happens every month. It says, Russell T Davies has said that episode 2 script contains the words Liverpool lesions and none diegetic. It also has a studio that's thrumming and humming and about to start one of the most important shots in Doctor Who's history. Eyes looking askance emoji. Eyes looking askance emoji. This tweet's really interesting to me. Don't bring in what you actually know, but what's your impression if you just saw that tweet without knowing some of what it's misreporting there?
Well, an episode about the lesions of Liverpool could be potentially quite interesting, yeah.
Sounds pretty cool. Great alliteration. That's really, Liverpool lesions. It sounds like a great episode title or something. I thought that sounded quite good. An episode script having the words non-diegetic also sounds cool. That's maybe a meta sort of episode.
Although it does depend on whether the word is in the dialogue or just in the little text around the dialogue. It might be a bit less interesting if it's the latter.
Does the episode have a studio in it? Is the studio humming in the episode? Are we getting a meta episode with the words non-diegetic in dialogue and there's a studio in the episode? Or is the studio... You see what I mean?
They're filming on a studio, and whether it's humming, as part of the performance of the studio, whether it's mechanically humming or it's humming with energy as people move around it and they get the show made, that there's a lot of context missing.
And that's cool. They're about to do one of the most important shots in Doctor Who's history. I wonder what are the most important shots in Doctor Who's history? I wonder.
I guess maybe when the monk's TARDIS in like the Time Meddler, establishing that there are other Time Lords out there.
Yeah. I think David Tennant holding his golden hand up in front of his face is one of the most iconic shots of the show. Maybe it's that shot again. Because it says episode 2, but what does it mean? Episode 2 of the 60th or episode 2 of series 14?
Presumably at this point, series 14, right? If they're talking about it.
You'd think so. I still see people saying, like the David Tennant things are still getting filmed, which is, you've got to be a prodigious Doctor Who nerd to know, well, actually, they're not even shooting quite yet. They're shooting everyone else right now. Like, you have to be our level of, geekdom to know that. But yeah, of course, Tennant's episodes have been in the can. Well, all of Tennant's episodes for now have been in the can for quite some time. Yeah, so that's our tweet, our well-meaning tweet, which gets plenty of engagement. And this is just an example. I'm not saying, this one time in this one press cycle, there was one tweet that got a bunch of stuff wrong and a bunch of people reacted to it. This is just an example because this is indicative of the kind of things that happen every single month. let's look at what the magazine actually says. Even, I think it's also just worth clarifying as well, it's not only the little press cycle before Doctor Who magazine comes out, it's also that not everyone buys Doctor Who magazine. So even when it is actually out, it's kind of poor form to like screenshot a 12-page interview or whatever and just post it on Twitter, which, would give everyone the context, but it's a paid magazine trying to make its living. So people generally don't do that. But people also will keep kind of engaging with the kind of preconceived ideas of what's going to be in the magazine as well. So even the days after the magazine has come out, it's kind of like a hangover where it's still not kind of hitting. Do you know what I mean? Because only the people with the magazine or people whose friend has the magazine or whatever and who's talking about it with them are going to get what's actually going on. And everyone else is kind of continuing on with this kind of pre-state of what may or may not be in the magazine.
Yeah, it's a sort of endless rolling bubble of nonsense.
The natural mechanics of misinformation are that the more outrageous something is, the more staying power it has, but also the less likely it is to be accurate. So you get versions of stories that heighten things or that take bits out of context in a way that either intentionally or unintentionally make them seem more exaggerated and outrageous. And then that sticks a lot more effectively in the public imagination than the correction to that does, right?
Of course, yeah.
Which means that when the magazine actually comes out and you get lots of people going, oh, actually, in context, this means this instead of what it sounded like, that's a lot harder to diffuse. You see it all the time that people still repeat stuff that you're pretty sure has been entirely debunked because it just sounds better.
I think it's a function of how, well, certainly how social media works, but I think how people talk in general. But like in social media, like you're saying, the engagement will tend to happen with stuff that aggravates people more than people just getting chuffed about something. And so, and the way a site where you kind of note on other people's notes or retweet or quote tweet or private quote tweet, other people's tweets, is that you keep kind of bouncing off into the different bubbles. Like you see RTD said something transphobic or something about David Tennant and Jodie Whittaker, and then, someone will react to that, and then someone might quote tweet reacting to that, not even talking about Doctor Who so much, but talking about a general trend of, transphobic attitudes to fashion. And then someone else is talking to that. And then someone else is like, hey, wait a minute, RTD didn't even say that. And it just kind of all compounds and stacks on. And everyone's kind of talking about different things. And it's just kind of this big mad spider web of discourses just spiraling out forever.
This is my area of study, actually.
Yeah, I thought you would enjoy this sort of discussion. But do you think in person it's that different? I mean, we don't have the function of like compounding on this kind of stack of lasagna sheet quote tweets or anything. But I think still people prefer to talk about the controversial or the salacious. People talk easier about stuff that makes them angry.
Yeah.
Than stuff that kind of defuses things.
Misinformation definitely exists outside the online realm, for sure.
Often face-to-face conversations are perhaps even more like divorced from any possibility of, sourcing things correctly or finding the actual information, because they're just kind of taking place in this isolated, often environment rather than as part of the interconnected web, so to speak. I can't, like in a live conversation with someone, say, hey, check out my website. I've actually got a source for everything I'm saying. Look at this page number. It's all true. So that's a good point. It's more ephemeral in person.
Although in actual conversations, you're the equivalent of replying to one another on Twitter back and forth, and everything's kept sort of equally. If you convince someone round or you talk through to explaining the full rationale, you do that on the same pitch, on the same level, and everyone listening gets the same continuity of that conversation going through, where the mechanics of Twitter emphasize quote retweets are the biggest driver of engagement on Twitter, and those are all divorcing a comment from context. That's the whole point of a quote tweet, is that you take it out of context and comment on a little bit of what somebody else has said, and that divorcing from context is massively harmful for fact-based conversations.
Also, in real life, they can't block you.
That's true. Well, not yet.
Oh, yeah. Not yet.
Do you think... I see some people get really, truly frustrated and bothered by this sort of thing. And the misreportings do miff me some of the time. But For me, all this sort of thing, these web of discourses and how they're misreported and reported, it fascinates me at the end of the day. It's something that interests me and I enjoy it a lot of the time. Mirth, as Gig said earlier, as opposed to being actually frustrated with it. Oliver, I imagine you're probably the same. Like you said, you've got a background in some of these sorts of topics. In a past life, I had something of a PR background. So all this sorts of stuff, it's very specifically interesting to me. These topics and the way info spreads and alights here, all that sort of thing. When I say that, I mean like the way the info spreads, the kind of the meta way this all works, the way the misinterpretations happen and pile up and compound and everything. Because obviously some of the specific issues, some of these discourses and things they're concerning. I don't find the topics a joke or funny, but Doctor Who Discourse it's such a low stakes, fiction focused iteration of these kinds of things. And the solutions to the misinterpretations are they're so in reach and they're so consistently ignored that it feels sort of like a real life running gag in a lot of ways to me. The never ending cycle of misquotes and out of context, blurry phone photos of magazine pages, the out of context quotes, the cycle of people learning old crazy things showrunners have said, all that sort of thing. The song is ending, but the story never ends. But for you, Gig, as an admirer of fiction and the theatrical, practitioner of the theatrical, do you get any enjoyment out of this sort of thing, or does it actually irritate you?
I suppose when it's with Doctor Who, which is fairly inconsequential in the larger scheme of things, I find it's pretty funny. It's pretty farcical and amusing. I think when it comes to more serious matters, like political ones and things to do with people's future, life and death, it's a bit less fun, and the same things still happen in lots of ways. It's a bit more despair-inducing in that context.
Yeah. We definitely use Doctor Who and the showrunners and all these related things as a microcosm of larger issues. It's like a kind of safer space to talk about, issues, bleeding into and reaching out of the show. It's like a symbolic kind of thing I think we're doing, to use Doctor Who to talk about some of the stuff. I think everyone's doing that to some extent. We'll dig into that a bit more later. The different levels of seriousness people attach to how they use Doctor Who as, connected to real world social and political things. But yeah, it's a low stakes thing, but it can be used to talk about larger things in a kind of symbolic way.
Synecdoche Doctor Who.
Yeah. I don't want to sound like I'm being like, I have no emotions on these issues, or I find all this funny, so I'm heckin' superior. Like, there's loads of things in Doctor Who and Doctor Who fandom and discourses on, and all this sorts of thing that makes me, very emotional and worked up, that wouldn't to, tons of other people. And so I get it. I don't think it's silly at all to get worked up over these sorts of issues swimming around here. I think it's premature to have big reactions flare up, not only without the actual context of quotes or interviews or whatever, but before the contexts are even really available, like before the magazine has come out, it's premature to, have a big summit over the contents of the magazine. Like, RTD doesn't get to reign in hell forevermore if one waits 3 or 4 days before getting very publicly declarative and decisive about something he's supposedly said. And I think even from the social media kind of sides of things, I think would-be cancellations and things like that tend to spread further and be a lot juicier if there are actual receipts, like tweeting out an interview clip of someone like literally saying something is a lot more effective than like third or fourth hand, I can't believe X said Y or whatever. Like think of the whole John Barrowman explosion. Like that, I don't think that would have or could have happened in the same way if it didn't sprout from an actual specific video of actual actors from Doctor Who actually talking about his actual behavior going viral. It was a very tangible thing. It's worlds and worlds away from this kind of fourth hand, the magazine isn't out yet, but I've heard this is in it, and so we're talking about a misquote that's in it kind of thing. But anyway, Oliver, what do you think about this sorts of thing? Do you find this sort of thing enjoyable and fascinating as I do, or is that not so? Did I assume wrongly?
Yeah, like Gig said, certainly I would rather see people misattribute the 5-year plan quote again. I would rather see that kind of misinformation than people misrepresenting political positions and throwing down progressive candidates based on weird rumours that started out of nothing. But I also do get frustrated generally speaking, about the web of miscommunication and misinformation, and the fact that it's so hard for evidence to permeate through that and make a difference. The fact that, as an example, the fact that people still constantly repeat, well, Chibnall had a 5-year plan. Even now his era's over, and most of that didn't, bear out. Most of the implications of what people thought that meant didn't. The fact that entirely fabricated idea, a misquote attributed to somebody else, which didn't even mean that in the first place. The fact that became, folk fact, and that we all had to hear it all the time. It's definitely an example of something I find more broadly frustrating and in no small way despair-inducing.
I think the kind of flip side of that, though, is I think it's very soothing and meditative to sort things, smooth things out. And so I love when the 5-year discourse, the Chibnall 5-year discourse comes up. I love to be able to go and search, where did this actually come from? And, get the actual root of it. And you've solved the mystery, your Columbo, you've worked it out there. And then you have that proof you can use whenever you want. I think that's a great joy for me, is finding, weird rumors or discourses in Doctor Who and actually trying to unravel. And sometimes it's really hard. And sometimes I have to find weird old books to get to the root of it. But I find that hugely enjoyable, to cut through the knots here and find the truth. Because it's Doctor Who at the end of the day. And like Oliver's talking about, there's topics where it's not so easy to actually cut through and find a specific truth so much as actually so-and-so did say that. And like we discussed in the This is the Future conversation, RTD himself says, don't take us at our word so much. So many of the anecdotes you hear about Doctor Who's filming didn't really happen. Or we've kind of fictionally, accidentally made them up. We've collated things over the years. The mind is a very funny thing for humans. And, it's all a big ball of wibbly-wobbly craziness, and it's hard to find bits of truth and reality in all these discourses, but that's the fun of it, I find.
So what did RTD actually say?
So what RTD actually... Well, first of all, a lesion, in case anyone doesn't know, it's like a wound. It's also totally irrelevant because... So what happened? Page 7 of Doctor Who magazine 586, Russell's production notes he does when he's showrunner. What he says is... I have an office at last, and here I am with episode 2 in front of me, parentheses. It contains the word Liverpool, legions, and non-diegetic, end parentheses.
Wait, legions?
Yeah.
With a G?
Legions. But
Was it just entirely misquoted?
Yeah, that was completely wrong. Yeah.
To be fair, the Legions of Liverpool is a good title too. I don't know what that's about, but
it's not bad.
Non-diegetic, he does say it contains the words non-diegetic. So there you go.
And there is a comma in the real quote, let's not forget. The tweet had it as Liverpool Legions, whereas here it's Liverpool, Legions.
And then he says that in parentheses, and a studio that's thrumming and humming and about to start one of the most important shoots in Doctor Who's history. A shoot and a shot are very different things. A shot is static, it's a singular shot. A shoot is something you do over a course of time. A shoot is comprised of hundreds and thousands of different shots. A shoot is, over days or weeks.
An important shoot will be an episode.
Yeah.
An important shoot is as vague as we're doing Shooty's first episode or an important episode of Series 14. An important shot is very specific and...
Yeah, well... My worry with this important shoot is that in this episode 2 script of Series 14, Russell may have forgotten to specify so iconic for any of the specific shots, and we might have a legion of fans feeling a lesion at missing out on this so-called important, one of the most important shots in Doctor Who history. They're going to be scanning episode 2 looking for it, and they're going to get nothing. So I really hope he's hammered down the iconic shots in there.
That will absolutely happen. I saw in the replies to the tweet that spun off this whole little conversation that someone was thinking, because RTD mentioned the studio thrumming and humming and the important shot and so on, maybe it's another TARDIS. one of the most important shots in Doctor Who's history is going to be another TARDIS showing up, because that's never happened before. I think a lot of this, a lot of this, people trusting random Twitter accounts and absorbing stuff and making stuff up. I think a lot of it is fans hearing what they want to hear and kind of projecting things like, "Oh my God, there's going to be lore! Look, another Time Lord," onto whatever hypothetical idea of the next series they have in their heads.
It's always another Time Lord.
I think there's a state, and it's not like a growth, I've been through this and therefore everyone's meant to grow through this to grow up. It's not that thing at all. It's not like you have to progress through this, but I think there's a stage a lot of Doctor Who fans go through, or fans of anything. I certainly went through it, where I remember there were days where I used to, if I really liked something or really wanted something in Doctor Who, I would kind of, and I'm not saying I don't do this now, I just try not to do this so much. I would kind of jam the square pegs in the round holes to try and make it fit. Like back in 2015, I absolutely loved Series 9. I still do. But what I really would have loved, what if every episode of Series 9 was great? That's what I really would have wanted. And there were some episodes of Series 9 I didn't like so much. And so whereas now, I just kind of go, yep, that's a shame. Let's talk about it. Why did those episodes not work? Back then, I'll be like, no, they need to work because I need all of Series 9 to work. And so I'd start my head canons and I'd start my interpretations. Well, actually, this episode links into the themes really well because it does. And I'd be doing my own kind of creative work. And it's not a bad thing at all. But, it's essentially, it's a cope at the end of the day. Is I'm trying to jam. I'm trying to say a certain 2 episodes in Series 9 actually worked really well. And I don't think they did. And I knew they didn't. Even as I was saying, that's why I was coping so hard, is because I knew they didn't really work, but I wanted the whole series.
It's very cathartic to hear you admit this after having had these conversations with you in the past.
Yes, in 2015, I think, I probably talked with Gig about this. No, those are bad episodes, in my opinion, and I let go of all the defenses I ever made of them. But I think if I hadn't, I would be one of these people trying to jam in, actually, maybe deep down I know the quote's not really saying that, and I know this isn't really happening, but I really want it to. And so I'm trying to kind of manifest it up in the world by my force of creative will. And, I think it's a beautiful thing in some way. I think some of the things I said were very creative, and I love that. But I think they were kind of out of sync with reality. And I think you see that in some of the conversations like Gig is saying now. It's not a bad thing necessarily, but it isn't kind of untrue thing.
There's quite a stark example is I think sort of respectable group of people going, well, the Spy Master doesn't make any sense after Missy, so let's just pretend. Yeah. And I think that differentiation's important, where if you're clear it's a headcanon, and you're going, look, this isn't in the text, but it's nice to pretend. I think there's a difference between that and trying to stretch the actual text itself or the meta text so much of the time.
Absolutely.
And making the paratext fit your version of events, which has happened a lot.
Yeah, it's the difference between acknowledging a fault and consciously mending it and refusing to acknowledge the fault in the first place.
Exactly, yeah.
You see, some people were like self-awarely saying, I'm going to go on a spot of canon welding now, and here's how I could make things fit together. And then it's like they're kind of self-awarely doing it as a creative exercise. And I think that's the best of both worlds, because it's like you can kind of have an on-the-level conversation with them because they're aware that, well, this wasn't really what was intended, or this doesn't really work. But wouldn't it be cool if we could make it fit? And that's where, we get, like I know Oliver likes to rewrite like the way episodes would work and things like that. And a lot of people do that. And that's a great creative thing where you're not trying to say, well, actually the Vanquishers worked amazingly well, because you're going, I don't think it did, but here's how it could. And then you're kind of making something. I think to kind of split it like that, I think is really fertile. I also think different websites work differently for this, because like I think somewhere like Tumblr, you can kind of sequester yourself a little better, where like you're more only going to be interacting with people who kind of have the same approach as you do. But somewhere like Reddit, it's kind of a free-for-all. And so if you start talking about like your interpretation of 13, which is mostly like your own headcanon, like I know we've had Astra on before who explores this quite well. If you're talking about a version you've kind of made up and kind of in a collective state of headcanon with other people with, that's all well and good and makes perfect sense if you're doing it somewhere. If you go and do it on Reddit, you can do that, but you're going to have other people going, well, the 13 isn't like that, and that's ridiculous. And then you're kind of talking across purposes a bit. And Twitter's kind of a mix, I think. There's bits sometimes exploit into a free-for-all, but there's also kind of sequestered bits. and it kind of all mixes and matches. But I think people coming at the whole approach to the show and approach to discourse around the show in such different ways, you get this kind of multiplicity of takes and arguments. It's all very interesting.
So maybe we'll get the Shooty as the 14th Doctor enclave at some point somewhere in the communities.
Yeah. Another thing is I sometimes see when people get defensive about trying to like kind of cling to the original misquotes or things like that with this sort of thing, is there's sometimes a spin to, oh, well, you're being judgmental or antagonistic towards the, misquoter or whoever. But did you know English is their second or third language, or they're dyslexic, or whatever else to kind of build like a line of argument for, well, then you shouldn't be focusing on the misquote or whatever. And like, that's all well and good. But the fact of the matter is the focus is on what someone like Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat said or whoever. And English is their first language, and, they're very public figures. So what they say is, to be disseminated into the public like that. So I think it's kind of a tangential, not the actual point, what the reproducer of their information is saying, because that's not what people are really ideally focusing on, is it? It's what the showrunners themselves said. And also, I don't have that much sympathy for the clingers to the misquotings at the end of the day, because it's your own fault if you're just believing random Twitter accounts. You don't have to do that. Why would you immediately believe some random Twitter account that has no authority? People do it time and time and again, and I don't know why. And so many of these accounts don't even have like, oh, Doctor Who production info in their names or whatever. They're just completely random people, and they say something and people will just believe it for some bizarre reason. But then the other thing is there are some accounts, with names like Doctor Who production facts or whatever, and people just go on and believe them as well. Nearly all of them don't source anything. Have you noticed that? A lot of them will actually make a joke out of not sourcing anything. So what's with believing them? Why would you do that? And then there's a couple that do source things, and that's great. And you can always double check the sources if you want to be absolutely sure what they said has veracity to it. And I don't think enough people do that. But anyway, with this sort of thing, Liverpool lesions, these sort of mix-ups, can you think of any other examples of this kind of thing when it comes to Doctor Who fandom, this kind of confusion?
Oh, there's tons. Neo, we were talking about the Barrowman in Good Man Goes to War.
Yes, yeah.
Which people... Stephen Moffat was going to include John Barrowman. He was in the script, or at least in the story outline, and then was taken out because he was filming Miracle Day. And that's all stuff we've got evidence for. But it's become pretty much accepted fan wisdom that the plot was he would have got his head chopped off and become the face of Bo, which there's no evidence for whatsoever, apart from the fact that it's quite neat. Fans have joined those dots together without the evidence itself, and it's become as securely sort of fan factual as his inclusion itself, which actually did happen objectively.
The Captain Jack Good Man Goes to War thing, it's a perfect example. It's a confluence of all these things, assumptions and fan wisdom, and the truth being a tricky thing in the gaps between the assumptions people make and people really wanting something to be true. Yeah, it's a perfect confluence of all those things. So the common fan narrative is that Stephen Moffat was going to put Captain Jack into A Good Man Goes to War, but John Barrowman was busy filming Torchwood Miracle Day, and so it didn't happen. Which is like essentially true, sure, but there's a lot of assumptions being made in how people talk about that. So I think some worthy context to all this is the relationship between Stephen Moffat and John Barrowman, at least in the 2010s and 2020s, which Entertainment Weekly phrases it as, the relationship between Barrowman and Moffat is famously frosty, in part because of the former's, Barrowman's, suggestion that the latter, Moffat, prevented Torchwood returning to TV, an allegation Moffat has denied. End quote. So what's with all that weirdness? Well, in August 2016, at a Comic-Con in Honolulu, Barrowman had this to say.
Jack come back?
I have no idea. It's not up to me. It's up to the people who produce the show, and it's up to the showrunner. I did have, I am pushing for Torchwood to come back. But without giving too much away, I was on a phone conversation with one of our executives, exec producers, telling me the obstacles that we have to face in order to bring it back. And I don't like to see things as obstacles, because my feeling is that it's a good show, it deserves to come back, and I'm being told that it can't come back until it's got approval from certain people involved with Doctor Who, and I don't understand why one show has to have the approval of another in order to come back. But that might change when somebody leaves, and somebody new and wonderful comes in.
Later in 2016, at a different Comic-Con, this one in Chicago, there was another question to Barrowman about, do you think Captain Jack will be coming back?
With the recent writing change, do you think Captain Jack will be coming back?
Yes.
No. Put it this way. What you mean with say the first part of the question again, because I want to make sure I heard you right.
With the recent writer change.
With the recent writer change, which doesn't happen for a year. I actually put in a call to somebody, and I spoke to them. Hi, Kels. And I put a call into them, and we had a big long conversation, because I'm determined to, no matter what barriers or wall they put in front of me, I'm determined to push and fight to get Torchwood back. And I'm not stepping on any toes here, but I will say, as long as Stephen Moffat is involved, Jack will not be back. That's it. So that's it, right? But I have to move forward from that, and I have to Chris Chibnall's coming on board, and I love Chris. And Chris was part of the Torchwood development and everything. And I know, just put it. I'm gonna hopefully talk to Chris. So we're gonna sit down. I'm gonna take him to dinner.
A bit later again, in 2016, talking with Radio Times, Barrowman said, in regards to, trying to get Torchwood to come back, Barrowman said, I was told that there are some obstacles to overcome, and every time I tried to talk about a way around them, it was almost like there was another obstacle. And this is a personal thing for me. This is not anything that was discussed, but I find it really a little disheartening that a company like the BBC can't just say, put your egos aside, we're going to go forward with this. I travel all over the world, and I see the popularity of Torchwood. But when it comes down that it's not being done because of people's egos, I find that really difficult. There's a lot of politics involved, and the people that are close to it, I think, would love to see it done, but there's just certain egos in the path that are just standing in the way. That's all I'll say. And then Moffat himself had a response to that. Moffat said, if you don't give a damn about Torchwood, skip this post. For those of you who do, you may be aware that John Barrowman has been saying publicly that I've been blocking a new series of Torchwood. To be very clear, I haven't blocked it. I wouldn't block it. I wouldn't even be able to block it. I didn't even know a revival had been mooted till I read about it on the internet. As John perfectly well knows, it's not my show, and I could no more prevent it happening than he could cancel Sherlock. I am bewildered and a little cross even to be included in this conversation. For the record, I really like the show, especially the third series, and would be very happy to see more. Monsters and Mayhem, why not? But the fact is, it has nothing to do with me. Please pass this on to the anxious and the angry. I've had enough hate mail now. Now zooming way forward to 2020, after Fugitive of the Judoon, so Jack's reappearance in the show, had aired, Entertainment Weekly asked him about, he never got a chance to act with Capaldi or Matt. Did you have moments where you sat at home and thought, I wish Captain Jack could have appeared with those doctors? Barrowman said, well, as much as I would have loved to, I knew it wouldn't probably have happened because it's entirely up to the showrunner at that moment. And that showrunner was, gosh, what was his name? The interviewer says, Stephen Moffat. Barrowman replies, there you go. So with Stephen, it wasn't going to happen. But with Chris, there was always that chance because Chris was also a showrunner for Torchwood. So he's got a love for Captain Jack, and I was glad that he called. So what's going on there? Why is there enmity between Barrowman and Moffat? You see, Barrowman seems to feel very rejected or aggrieved or in conflict with Moffat, and Moffat seems kind of confused and then cross about this sort of random antagonism that seems to be coming across him. That's how it tends to read to people, I think. Why did all that happen, and how does that connect to A Good Man Goes to War? Moffat asked him to come back, right? And then he couldn't do it because he was busy with Torchwood. And then why is there so much anger about this? Captain Jack was even referenced in the 50th and everything. And what's helpful here is knowing the numbers. So Torchwood Miracle Day filmed from January through May 2011. A Good Man Goes to War filmed from 11th of January 2011 to... It was mostly done by around 26th of January, and then there were some pickups through March 2011. So what Moffat had to say back in mid-2011 was, I'd have brought back Captain Jack for A Good Man Goes to War because it'd be obvious for him to call upon Jack in those circumstances. But John was busy doing Miracle Day. Even if he was doing the role in Wales, that's really hard to do. But when we've got a good story, we'll do it, Moffat said, in reference to bringing Captain Jack back. Moffat said, you can't just bring somebody back and say, that's a story. That's just somebody walking through a door. I won't be thinking, how do you bring Captain Jack back? I'll be thinking, you know what this needs? We need to bring Jack back for it. And of course, Barrowman always wants to return to Doctor Who or to Torchwood. That year in 2011, he told a Comic-Con, I love playing Captain Jack. It's the best coat I could put on every morning, so I'm up for it. And that was in reference to a question about whether he'd be keen to return to Doctor Who if the opportunity came up. So Moffat absolutely did consider putting Jack into A Good Man Goes to War. Moffat wrote most of Good Man Goes to War while on holiday in Dubai, and he finished it around the 17th of December 2010. And then the episode was made as its own block 4A in January 2011, as we said. The read-through for it was on 6th of January. The first day of block 4A filming for the episode was 11th of January. To quote from the complete history book for A Good Man Goes to War, work continued on the episode A Good Man Goes to War from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. on Monday, 24th of January, the same day that Torchwood Miracle Day began production in Cardiff for 2 weeks after a fortnight's recording in the USA. So the whole little interesting thing I think happening there is we have it absolutely solid fact that Moffat considered putting Captain Jack into A Good Man Goes to War. We have it as fact that he didn't end up doing it. We have it as fact that Moffat's talking about John Barrowman was busy off doing Miracle Day. The little thing I think we add to that narrative that's not actually there is we assume John Barrowman was asked to come back. But where is that? Moffat didn't say he asked him. He said he knew he was busy. Could it be that Moffat just asked a producer or something, can I get John Barrowman back? And the producer was like, well, he's busy doing Torchwood Miracle Day through those dates. And so Moffat was like, damn, I'll make something else up. You know, we don't have that on the record, but I think that's a possibility. John Barrowman is the type of guy who literally had provisions on other shows that he could return to Doctor Who if he needed. Back in 2016, he told Radio Times, the answer to whether he'd return to Doctor Who is always absolutely. It's a show and genre that changed my life. I love it dearly. And if I'm asked, I would do it at the drop of a hat. And also, my producers here in the US for the show I'm on at the moment, Arrow, they've said if that did happen, we'd let you do it. I would love to do it. So he's the type of guy who's literally talked with producers on his other shows, you know, can I go back to Doctor Who if they ask me and everything. Also, this doesn't just tie into our dissemination of info topics here. It also will tie into the RTDisney and sort of thing, because we're going to talk about spin-offs a lot, and we'll talk about Torchwood in comparison and contrast to other types of spin-offs that could happen. But anyway, from Barrowman's side in all this is from a article that's now, it can only be accessed, you know, via web archive. I don't know why it was taken down. It might have just been sites getting reshuffled over the years. Who knows? But anyway, it's an interview with the Sci-Fi website with Barrowman, and you get his take on the whole Captain Jack appearing in Good Man Goes to War thing. And this is a take I see most people not aware of, the people who talk about this whole Captain Jack and Good Man Goes to War thing. So the website asks, and for reference, this is from after Fugitive, of the Judoon, but before Revolution of the Daleks. So the website asks, it's been 9 years since we've seen Captain Jack. There have been some rumours over the years that this has almost before. Side note, I assume it's almost happened before, but there's no happened in there. Website error, interviewer error maybe. Anyway, Barrowman's reply is, I'll be honest with you, it was all rumours. At one point, something was said and someone else put out a statement that we asked him and he wasn't available. But I'm telling you right now, that's not true. No matter who says it, I'll tell you the truth. Nobody asked me. Because if they did, I would have said yes and changed the schedule and done a different job because Captain Jack is that important to me. That kind of angered me because at one point people were answering on my behalf and it wasn't true. So when this came about, this was factual. This was true. I jumped at it. I said, absolutely. I was in the street screaming when it happened. Ironically, I had just visited Bill Pullman in the theatre, and of course Bill played Oswald in Torchwood Miracle Day. I came out of the Old Vic Theatre and got the phone call from Chris Chibnall and started jumping around in the streets. I then called Russell Davies and said, can you believe it? And he said, bloody marvellous. So that's super interesting. I'm not sure about the done a different job bit because it was Torchwood Miracle Day. I'm sure he was going to do that one way or the other, but maybe last minute schedule, who knows? And even if it wasn't, that doesn't negate the fact that if he wasn't asked, he wasn't asked. It's his word to take here, but I mean, Moffat never specifically said he directly asked him, so there's a lot of thorniness. There's a lot of really fascinating thorniness when it comes to this topic. I think it's interesting that theoretically no one's really, nobody started out wrong there in that both seemingly contradictory versions of events in Jack's absence from the episode could have actually both have happened together. Both could be true. It's another one of those examples that the truth is a very tricksy thing.
An example of someone really wanting one thing to be true and trying to slot it into their personal narrative.
Yeah. If this actually happened that way, to be filming a Doctor Who-ish thing and not get the call, can you come back to actual Doctor Who?
Kick in the teeth.
Yeah, I can't overstate. Him of all men would have been severely affected by that. And then on Moffat's end, to suddenly get, this kind of titan of Doctor Who actors to be start a feud with you and saying you're trying to cancel Torchwood and you're not even thinking about Torchwood. That must have been very bizarre on his end. Yeah, I feel like both men hurt in different ways. Not a good situation for everyone, but at least we got Miracle Day out of it, so the audience won in the end, didn't they?
Hey, it's pretty good. It's not terrible.
That segues perfectly in, because what was Miracle Day? It was a co-production with America, with stars. Russell working with American studio, with American producers, taking notes off Americans, which leads perfectly into RTDisney. To back up, in October, November, what was the thinking? When we first learned of the Disney stuff, when we talked in the This is the Future conversation gig, what was the general mood of us and of people in general at the time regarding Disney?
Well, in that conversation, we cut through a lot of bullshit like that article from, was it the Times or the Telegraph or one of those?
Telegraph, that didn't mention Bad Wolf.
Yeah, exactly. And just sort of very vague, unclear and sort of dodgy reporting about Disney's role on the show. And conflicting lines coming from people like Disney is co-producing it, Disney is just funding it, Disney can give it a massive budget and all that stuff. And I guess we sort of cut through some of that. But also, I guess there was some ambiguity, maybe, regarding what the truth was and how involved Disney really would be.
In the new Doctor Who magazine 586, there is description, there is decluttering, there is divulging to do with Disney and Davis. There's a big interview where how to describe Ben Cook, the legendary Ben Cook. If anyone's doing a Doctor Who interview, I always want it to be him. From Cardiff with Love, legendary Ben Cook's interview with Phil Collinson, Julie Gardner, Jane Tranter, Russell T Davies. God, it's even just looking at all those names together, it is like 2005 again, or even 2004 with a Doctor Who magazine. It's like I'm looking at the writer's tale. It's like I'm looking at those old production notes. It's like I'm reading the inside story. It's like all these, this literally is the exact same set of people. It's kind of surreal. I think.
Yeah.
Not even necessarily in a positive or negative way, but it makes me think of, there's a moment in Twin Peaks: The Return where something happens and my eyes, kind of boggled out of my head because I was like, what? How? But that was 20 years. How are they doing? That's not part of any of the deleted scenes. How is this person back? What's going on? And I'm like, somehow David Lynch has actually done the magical and he's brought the past back, into the present. And I don't know how eventually I learned how he did it. I don't know how he did it, but he's actually, he's brought it back. And so sometimes when I see these pictures of literally the whole team back and they're all making Doctor Who again, I kind of get that. It's not a positive or negative thing necessarily. It's just a surreal, wow, they've actually reached into the past and, time traveled it back into the present. It's pretty surreal. Do you guys get that sense?
We've come so far just to go home again.
Yeah. Normally if there's a revival, you'd have Russell back and then it'd be some different people, some of the same people, but it's all the same execs. It's all the same producers. It's wild. It must speak very positively of their working relationships.
Yeah, I think the fact that the working relationships behind the original revival was so strong that it led to the creation of Bad Wolf, which then came full circle to create Doctor Who again. I think you can see the genesis of this latest development in the original saga, I guess. It just had an unexpectedly cyclical dimension to it.
It's very narrativized, which is, I guess, Russell always says that he's constantly writing. Everywhere he goes, he's writing dialogue for everyone in his head. Everything is storytelling to him. I guess it's fitting that such a kind of storybook kind of thing happened in real life.
I think it's particularly neat, just to tag on to that Bad Wolf is named for a recurring visual motif across the universe that comes back over time. It makes sense that's what they would call the company, but it's a weird bit of in-universe bleed through to reality.
The Ben Cook's interview starts. This isn't to do with Disney, but I think it's just a great opening, so it's worth saying anyway. It began as the summer of 2003 ended. Back then, Jane Tranter was the BBC's controller of drama commissioning. That September, she and Lorraine Heggessy, the controller of BBC One, officially commissioned Russell T Davies, a sought-after writer fresh off a string of hits, and Julie Gardner, BBC Wales's new head of drama, to revive our very favourite show. In January 2004, Phil Collinson came on board to produce. Sidebar, Phil Collinson was the great producer of Born and Bred, which we must get more into one day. Okay, back to reality. Together, they turned Doctor Who into one of the biggest things on TV. Almost 20 years later, they're doing it again, but bigger and noisier and better than ever, declares Russell, quashing any suggestion of déjà vu. We're not here to produce the Dalek invasion of Earth, he says, laughing. Then a pause. We will do one day, because I love that. But none of us wants to repeat stuff. I think that was just an interesting opening. None of us wants to repeat stuff. Déjà vu. There's, interesting threads there.
I think that's probably the most reassuring thing, if anything, that RTD is openly saying we don't want to repeat stuff. But having said that, when people say that, I don't always believe them. Because sometimes I think artists and creatives say, oh, this is so new for me, this is going to be so radical, such a change. And then it comes out and it actually isn't. Because I think people aren't always able to notice when they're repeating themselves in some ways, because they haven't interrogated the base assumptions. But, that's just, it's all speculative, really.
And for a writer, going decently outside your personal sphere of writing, doesn't necessarily equate to something brand new for the audience.
Yeah,
that's very true.
Is that him outright saying no Dalek invasion finale?
Well, when I say the Dalek invasion of Earth, it's italicized and meaning the serial, the Dalek invasion of Earth. So it's not quite clear what he means when he says we will produce the Dalek invasion of Earth one day. I assume he means we'll do a big Dalek invasion of Earth story one day. But hey, there's always those rumors that they're going to get David Bradley and they're going to remake Marco Polo in live action or whatever. So maybe why not? It's additive, isn't it? So why not? Why not remake it with David Tennant? That would be, get a different David and why not?
Is it like Shada where it's a later Doctor sort of remembering it? Or is he just playing the first Doctor?
No, Tennant playing the first Doctor sounds like a much more interesting proposition.
That's quite good.
Why not? No, I won't say it as Gaddis would say it, but they let many men have it the first Doctor these days. Talents, all of them. So, well...
Bill Hartnell, useless.
I was thinking of Rastafarian. This is, yeah. There was that racist guy.
Oh, God.
Wait, what?
The Black Adric incident.
Yeah.
No.
So the guy who, this has nothing to do with Disney, although Disney wouldn't want this, but the guy who did the voiceover for the first Doctor in The Day of the Doctor, what is it? Calling the War, Council of Gallifrey? This is the Doctor. Of course, Hartnell never said Gallifrey, so a different man said Gallifrey. Mm-hmm. He's not David Bradley and he's not Steve Noonan. He's not any of our current first Doctors. He was a different man. Gig, what did he do?
I think it's kind of submerged in obscurity. Like, the moment it was discovered by Gallifrey Base, it all got deleted. So it's like, and it's just sort of been a strange radio silence around him since then.
But
really.
what got deleted, Gig? What did he do?
Well, basically, it was a SoundCloud clip on his account called, I think it was titled Black Adric. And the idea was that he was basically doing like a performance of Adric as if he was sort of, it's really hard to describe because we're only working off summaries of it from people who listen to it. But I think the idea was like Adric if he was acting black in some way, like sort of doing a Rastafarian accent and smoking weed and stuff. It was just apparently it was very strange, and it got deleted as soon as it was discovered, which I think says it all really. So yeah, there's been some sus vibes about that guy ever since.
Why are we talking about that? I completely forget how
You said Dalek Invasion of Earth. It sent us down a rabbit hole.
Right, yes, because I get so confused with who the first Doctor is these days. Who originated him? It was Noonan, wasn't it? Or was it Bradley? It's some guy called Bill had a go at it once.
Herndal. I think it was the name, something Herndal.
But, yes, very long time ago. Not as important as our...
Cushing? Was it Cushing?
Cushing, that's right. That's our first Doctor. We could almost... People joke about like the 3 or 4 ninth Doctors because we had Briggs, we had Eccleston, we had... Well, arguably we had... John Hurt, Rowan Atkinson, but it's the first Doctor where we've got the real bounty.
And the Avengers of First Doctors.
Avengers of the First Doctor. That's what Disney needs to get on. That should be their next project for Who. That's our spin-off.
Is Tennant setting history right there? We've had so many actors play individual incarnations. Tennant's decided to fix the average by playing lots of different incarnations as one actor.
He's doing a public service for us. Yeah, that's very true.
It averages out to one Doctor, one actor.
Okay, looking for Disney stuff. First, so Ben Cook asks Russell, Julie, Jane, from November 2023, the BBC will continue as Doctor Who's exclusive home in the UK and Ireland. Elsewhere in the world, new episodes will premiere on Disney+. Was it always a shoo-in that Doctor Who would need a streamer partner? Julie, it was always needed. How do you make a show like this in 2022 without that co-producing partner? But it wasn't a shoo-in because the market is really complicated and cutthroat. You know, I felt frightened. Are we going to find someone? How do we do this? There are a lot of things to work through, Russell. And that's where we had the support of the BBC, actually. The BBC backed Doctor Who before anyone, a streamer, had been signed up. That's what drew us in. The BBC's commitment to making this series come hell or high water. Jane, our task was to find a partner who understood both the particularity of Doctor Who, but also how that particularity could resonate across the world, and how to do that without ruining the particularity. And Disney Plus, they were the best in class. So what's happened there is the BBC, before Russell came on board, the BBC wanted to partner up with a streamer, but they didn't. They weren't like with Disney specifically. They just thought a streamer in general. Like it theoretically could have been Netflix, Amazon, the other ones. It was through, Bad Wolf and Russell and the new team that Disney specifically is what happens. But you can see how that would get confused quickly. Did Russell bring Disney? Well, kind of, but they were going to get a streamer one way or the other. Did BBC get Disney? No, but they wanted a streamer.
I think part of the conflicting interpretations and mix-ups that kind of spur some of these conversations is that, like, I think people want to either decide that something like the Disney Plus alliance is either a diktat from the BBC or it's Russell doing some wrecking thing, whereas in reality it's both of them, isn't it? It's not something that either side was just like, oh, you must have Disney, no, we must have Disney, no. It's the case of they're both in agreement on this, basically.
This is one of my favourite RTD quotes ever, comes from this magazine. So Ben Cook, his question is basically, lots of people love Doctor Who because of its uniqueness and its Britishness. I'm just paraphrasing here. I'm not going to read the whole magazine out word for word. That's not fair. He's, saying people are going to be anxious that Doctor Who doesn't stop being Doctor Who. There's that indefinable magic Britishness to it. How are you going to assure us, Russell and the producers, how is this still going to be Doctor Who and not Disney Who? Julie says, I'd say there's 3 answers to that. Number 1, Russell. And Russell says, and number 2, T. Number 3, Davis. so, yeah, he not wrongly, but he's got a rightfully high opinion of himself, I think now. Julie says, I think that's probably true. Russell laughs and says, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Julie says, no, but number 1 is, that's an italicized is Russell. Disney Plus is buying into his vision. Disney Plus is buying into his vision, and Russell's vision is very, very clear. And it's very British, and it's everything your readers will want it to be. The second thing is the BBC. The BBC own Doctor Who, and the huge strength of Doctor Who for Disney Plus is the title, having a known brand, and having that commitment from the BBC in terms of UK funding. That's all very, very appealing. And the third thing is Bad Wolf, what we understand the show to be and how we're here to serve Russell's vision. And then Phil Collinson talks about, Bad Wolf is a big deal in its own right. Like, even if Phil doesn't say this, but even if Russell wasn't involved, Bad Wolf making the show would still be a huge thing in its own right. And Russell says, you've got the producers of, you've got people behind Succession and his Dark Materials and The Night of here. Like, it's a ridiculous. This isn't the last team. This is an internationally renowned team. Even Russell aside, that's coming on here. So everyone's assuring each other that we're all the best, and so don't worry about Disney. We've done this before. Like I was saying about Miracle Day earlier, which was a lot of these people. They know what they're doing is basically, I think, their argument. And Disney specifically like us, and Disney, it's not just arbitrary that they're getting into Doctor Who. They're getting into Russell and they're getting into Bad Wolf, and so that's kind of their response for the Disney worries. That's the first part of their response. There's a second bit, but firstly, what do you think of that argument, which is like it's kind of their appeal to authority or experience, I suppose?
I think it's interesting. Obviously, points 2 and 3 help out with this, but I think it's interesting to put so much weight on Russell when a lot of the worry I've seen is about what happens to the show next.
Yeah.
Right? I've seen a lot of people absolutely certain, based off last time, that Russell's going to do a fab job of making some good TV and more so making some really popular TV. But a lot of people, I think, are quite anxious about what happens next and especially what role Disney has in that. Which I'm sure that things are contractually bound up enough to go back. Rights will always go back to the right places. The BBC own Doctor Who. There's not much leeway on that.
When people are scared of the BBC selling Doctor Who, it's just complete. The BBC would have to, functionally collapse, which it's not impossible.
Don't jinx it.
But like a sane and reasonably extant BBC is never going to sell its prize, cow. Like the merchandising alone, like there is no, realistic. No, yeah. It wouldn't make any sense for the BBC to sell Doctor Who. I think that just comes out of a fear people have of things being sold and, an incomplete understanding of how this sort of licensing and whatnot actually happens. Like, different people make it now, but it's theirs. Why would the BBC ever sell it? It would have to be a scenario so bad that this wouldn't be the top of your worries.
Well, that's exactly the thing. I don't think it's impossible at all that the BBC does at some point actually sell the proper full rights to Doctor Who, but that would happen during the entire collapse of the BBC, after which point, And I share the same concerns most people do about something that is in some ways a publicly held creative asset, moving into private ownership. Obviously that's, I don't like that. But the only way that Doctor Who's getting sold off fully is when the BBC sets fire.
Though in a way, the privatisation sort of already happened with BBC Studios, isn't it? Like it's like a different level of it is the thing.
That's what gets me. Is the thing I think some people are scared of happened in the Capaldi era. It already started being made by a commercial arm. That happened ages ago. So like the Bad Wolf thing, it's not BBC Studios, but BBC Studios weren't the BBC I think people were thinking of, that made the Tenet era or whatever. So it's like, I think a lot of what people are scared of has already happened, and a lot of it is impossible under the current state of affairs, which would have to change to a crazy degree. But that's not meaning you can't be upset about what's happened. Like, it's still a big deal that Disney are giving notes and, I can't watch it for free in Australia anymore. Like, it's still a big deal in lots of ways. But the thing of they're going to sell it and Disney are going to own it, that's not very founded for now.
I do think RTD's response to the group's response that they talk about just there, I do think it does feel like a short-term thing, not just in the sense of Russell like being it all hinging on Russell and such, but also I think just generally, I think assuring us that Russell's new era will be great doesn't really it's not looking really in the long term, like to what extent the whole Disney association might spool out like in the decades to come. Like, how long will it even last? I think people's concerns aren't necessarily even about it being sold off to Disney or whatever, but just in terms of whatever ideas or ideologies kind of motivate Disney as a company somehow working their way in some abstract form. And obviously that's very vague and people are obviously very paranoid about it.
In quite a real sense, not to be trite, but in the Series 3 finale, how the Doctor turns into flying Jesus and he can only do that because everyone's praying and has faith in him. I feel like there's a little bit here of kind of invoking of have faith in Russell. Russell is Russell is the angels are lifting Russell up, up the Titanic is kind of the thing here. And it's not undeserved. Like, he is an absolute titan in the industry, but it's like this cult of personality. One thing with the Disney thing also worth noting is because we'll talk about this more with the genesis of RTD2 stuff, but the Tenet 14 stuff and the Shooty 15 stuff is separate in quite a lot of ways. And one of those is Russell's talking about when we all came together and when the BBC was setting up this deal, it was with David. The return of David and Catherine is so extraordinary, and that gave us the wind in our sails. That gave us the confidence. When we didn't know how the studios might work, what the financing would be, who the streamer was, what the scripts would be like, we didn't know anything, but we had two spines, two geniuses, two beating hearts of production, and David and Catherine, and, blah, 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 they're amazing and everything. So it was under, working all the David stuff out that this stuff kind of came together. And then Shooty is kind of the era when it's all solidified into something.
I'm kind of intrigued by the idea that the return of David might have played a role, in the process of actually setting everything up. I don't know. I guess it's speculation on my part, but to the ceiling of the whole RTD2 production arrangement may have actually hinged on the fact that Tennant is coming back and everyone's going to love it again based on that. As well as just Russell T and Davies. Maybe David was the other D in that equation.
I think it's a big loud way of selling your new production. You go, we're doing Doctor Who again at its height. We're taking it back to when it was the biggest thing ever. Does anyone want to invest now? Right? Mm. And it's a clear signal, especially commercially, that it tells you about Series 14 as well. It says that Doctor Who going forwards is going to, in some sense, share the energy or the ambitions of that original run that we're invoking with the specials.
On the specials, so another bit in this Ben Cook interview, this is from the start when everyone's still appearing. This is when some of the producers are chatting amongst themselves. They say, while we wait for Julie, Phil and Russell talk shop. They've had notes from the Disney execs today on the newest edit of Tennant Special 3. I can't believe we missed that bit, Phil says of one particular shot. I know, exclaims Russell. We never saw the third baddie being disposed of, and now we do. Also, says Phil, that censored shot is so much better of her leaping off the ground. How did we never realise that? You see, says Jane, that's what network executives are there for. They lift up our edits. Hooray! Hooray, Russell.
It does feel almost beatific.
He's hurraying at Julie showing up. Yeah, not just at the idea of notes.
Okay.
Another Disney thing is when they're just talking about Bad Wolf Studios, they have a really big set of studios, like physical studios in Wales. Russell's saying, when the man from Disney Plus walked in, he said, oh my God, he was properly gobsmacked by it. Then Ben Cook saying, when the whole Disney announcement came out, part of the press release was to transform Doctor Who into a global franchise by bringing the series to Disney Plus under a shared creative vision that will deliver this quintessentially British show to future generations on an unprecedented scale. Russell says, this is huge, it's glorious. It's worth saying that to begin with, the entire impetus for that was from the BBC. It was their next future for Doctor Who that was decided before any of us came on board. Julie says that's correct. So again, the streamer thing was going to happen with or without Russell. It doesn't matter if it was going to be Pete McTighe or whoever else. They were going to partner with a streamer one way or the other.
I love the idea of these conversations happening without Chibnall, at all. You're just like, okay, we're going to have a streamer and just, sort it all out.
If they were all decided, why didn't they do... Yeah, it's too speculative to really wonder, but interesting. So the other defense they all have of Disney, and this is an interesting one, which is tying back into the we didn't see baddie being disposed of. Russell says, I know people are naturally worried about American producers having notes on things. Well, don't be. And that's it. That's the... that's not... Don't be. They're giving excellent notes. And I'm here to tell you, you haven't watched a drama on British television in 20 years that hasn't had American notes on it. Everything is a co-production. Watch the credits. All your favorite dramas have American co-producers. It's really completely normal. If you want any more reassurance, let me just tell you that we're about to transmit the words Mavic Chen on television for the first time since 1966. It is absolutely still the same show. Julie says Disney is marvelous. They care about the show. They love Russell's vision. It's a proper working relationship, but their hearts and souls are true.
Aww.
I don't want to jump right to the Mavic Chen thing because that's, I think, its own interesting thing. His point there is basically, I think you scrubs don't know how TV is made. It's like, we were talking about everyone's freaking out over something that happened in the Capaldi era, like the move to Doctor Who being made under a commercial arm. I think Russell's kind of saying something in a similar vein here. If you're all freaking out over something that has already happened to everything and happens all the time to everything, and it's like, well, you can complain, but this is happening everywhere to everything. It's very normal. I think that's a really interesting defense, and I think that's a better defense than, I'm amazing and I'm the Jesus Doctor of Doctor Who, and so I can protect and make everything work. What do you guys think?
I do think that the way he brings up Americans and focuses on Americans in particular sort of elides the concerns people might have with Disney in particular. I mean, later on in that interview, they say they all love Disney and such, so I guess they don't really acknowledge the idea of not loving Disney. But I guess at the same time, Disney is like this enormous entity, I suppose. It's not... it'll have overall brand goals and whatever, but it's not actually some supernatural voice that speaks a single idea through every facet of every single product in its massive arsenal. There will be contradictions. There will be things that don't sort of line up. So at the end of the day, maybe some of the sort of fears and horrors and dangers people have with Disney are sort of maybe not realistic, but at the same time, RTD doesn't really address people's objections to Disney as just like an organisation, I guess, as like a whole thing. And there's no reason he really would. At the end of the day, he's a TV producer, not a politician.
It's very astute that people don't actually know how TV is made and everything is a co-production. But that doesn't really... His defence of Disney and of the deal are talking very specifically to a very specific type of fan who's worried above everything else about the Britishness of it, right? He's talking to his generation there, right?
Yeah. It reminds me of in 2011 when they did some episodes set in America and they had BBC America helping them with it, and people were like, oh my god, they're Americanizing the show. No, it's just so bad. This is very, very stupid and paranoid and ridiculous. I mean, BBC America's deal with the show is dead now, isn't it? It's over. So you could include that as things that didn't pan out.
I think that's it's a very 1996 concern. It's very, don't worry, still British, which doesn't seem to actually key into what people are more concerned about, which seems like the politics and the economics of Disney, which I think is quite easy to dismiss in and of itself, in that, you know, any studio producing Doctor Who since it went commercial is producing it commercially. And I think it can simultaneously be true that that Disney naturally exerts an influence, often in subtle ways, that isn't going to have the most positive outcomes, but also that Disney is a commercial corporation that is entirely capable of producing very queer and decently politically radical content, because it's not a contradiction for a corporation to make that stuff, even if it doesn't believe it, because it's a corporation, right? They won't have any issue at all with RTD's queer vision because it will make lots of money.
Yeah.
And so they won't have any issue with it from that perspective. But there are other ways in which Disney is naturally, in their note-giving, just very subtly, more subtly than I think people imagine, going to exert an influence. And I think that's a fair enough thing to be concerned about. But it's definitely not take out this gay character. They're not going to be giving those notes.
And I think another part of it is that Disney is so associated with this idea of the cultural homogenization, of buying up everything and just producing loads and loads and loads of slop, basically. Where something that's genuinely good feels like a miracle, like a unicorn.
Slopification.
Yeah.
That's where I think there's actually a decent founding to some of the fears, is because there's something solid there. Because this gets misinterpreted in that, at least as of mid-January 2023, Russell hasn't come out and said, guys, I'm going to do a shitload of spin-offs for Disney. Remember that quote I said a few years ago? I still think the same thing, and it's happening. I'm doing it now. That hasn't happened yet, but there was that quote a few years ago where Russell was saying Doctor Who should have loads of spin-offs. He could totally support them. We should have the Nissa show. We should have blah, blah, blah. And people think of that, and then they look at Disney now, who, like, Disney Plus is, it almost seems its remit is to do 1 million. Like, they seem to, spin-offs just sprout off everywhere for everything with those shows. And I've seen some of them, and, you know, some of the endless spin-offs they do, I think are, well...
crap.
Bad?
I liked some of the One Division episodes. I thought some of that was pretty good.
Yeah, the first few were right.
And that's getting a spin-off, of course. Agatha's getting a spin-off.
Yeah, and spin-offs are getting spin-offs. It's like Big Finish over here. Star Wars, I've heard Andor's good.
It's pretty good.
Disney do make a shit ton of spin-offs, basically. And Russell did have that quote years ago saying Doctor Who should have a shit ton of spin-offs. And so I think it's a reasonable thing to say, I hope we don't get a shit ton of half-baked spin-offs, because I think there's, from both sides, you could kind of see where this could maybe happen. Whether it will or not, I think that's a decent fare where, you know, like, the show's going to get sold off forever is, you know, less founded, I think.
Yeah, see, some fans love the idea of the Doctor Who Marvel-style cinematic universe, and some fans dread it.
The thing is we have it. We have an example of it in the, I know I'm being that guy, but we have, you know, the Big Finish and, you know, to an extent the comics and the novels, we have an example of what if everyone got a spin-off? What if Lady Christina from that one David Tennant episode where she was like a thief who stole some diamonds, what if we gave her some box sets of her own? Like, we have this. And, of course, it wouldn't be the same producers or writers or anything, but we have an example of what if every character got a spin-off, basically. And it's like, are people into that? I guess some people are, but I've listened to more of it than is healthy. And, like, I mean, There's a couple of wins.
The big Finnish pay pigs are into it. That doesn't mean like the wider public would be, I think, is the big issue.
And I just don't agree. I don't think every character can, like Captain Jack. Now that's a character you can make another show from. And of course you got to add another lead in there. You've got to have Gwen too, but that character has enough richness and depth. And crucially, both the actor and the producers also thought, we're not just doing that character from Doctor Who. We've got to change him. We've got to broaden him out. We've got to develop him more. We've got to give him a kind of different angle. We've got to do more stuff with him and kind of evolve him in a different way for the spin-off. All that to me is like winning spin-off thinking. It's like get a rich character and then make sure he's not just doing the stuff you liked from the first show. Make sure we've got new arcs and new stuff for him. And then the show's in a whole new setting and the show kind of stems out of, Torchwood kind of evolves out of that Excalibur TV show idea Russell was having, before New Who. Like it's all, there's stuff there that isn't just, this character was popular on this show, generate 8 episodes, please.
I think what makes Torchwood and Sarah Jane Adventures successful as spin-offs, which so much of the other expanded universe and Disney spin-off stuff don't manage, is that Torchwood has a completely different remit to Doctor Who. It's its own thing. It's trying to do something different instead of, forgive me, Big Finish, a Lady Christina box set where she does, some Doctor Who episodes. I guess she does some little Doctor Who stories, and they're just, you could have written them for a Doctor, but instead Lady Christina de Souza's doing them.
The trouble with lots of spin-offs like this that fans like to imagine, so give every character a spin-off, is that the idea is just, let's have more content for the Doctor Who fans to hoover up, rather than Torchwood and Sarah Jane, which are looking at targeting specific different audiences, even some people who might like them without watching Doctor Who itself, which is unthinkable in this sort of Marvelised paradigm of spin-offs.
Hoover up with a W.
Even in like the spin-off things, I think of, I think Torchwood, whether, a lot of people think it's a very shaky show, that's totally fair enough. Even if you think most of the episodes didn't work, the premise is pretty workable, I think, isn't it? We've got a specific audience. It's sexy and it's violent. It's not for just the kids who watch Doctor Who. This is for the adults that watch Doctor Who. Or even just adults who are into sexy X-Files stuff. It's got that kind of different audience than Doctor Who. It's got a rich character. It's got a setting. There's all these different ideas. Even if you don't think the show worked, I think it's a pretty reasonable thing to say that there were a lot of ideas there that weren't just extract that thing from Doctor Who and do more of it. And I think even like a spin-off of Torchwood is, the audios of Torchwood. And I think one of the reasons they work so well is they don't do what the TV show did. Like most of those audios have a totally different remit where they're like, what if we just zeroed in on 1 or 2 characters for an hour and we did a kind of moody thing with them that was much more focused than the TV show ever did. And that's a different thing than the TV show. And then that kind of works because it's its own thing. I think of the couple of, I'm pretty critical of a lot of the New Who spin-offs on audio, but some of the ones I do think work, the Derek Jacobi Master ones, I think really work where it's doing something that Doctor Who would never do and can't do, and it doesn't have the shape of a Doctor Who story at all, the way that so many like the Jenny stories or often the River stories often do. Like there's a War Master box set, which I think is just exquisite, and it's one of my favorite things Big Finish have done. And like in the first episode, Jacobi's not really in it. He's in maybe 4 minutes of it. And then the box set overall is just like a completely original story that the Master's kind of a thread of, but it's just, it's completely own extant storytelling. And so it's like this story didn't evolve from what if the Master met some Ood and, that it's like you saw on Doctor Who. It's like, it's got all its own existing themes and it's got all its own existing concerns. And that's what you want in a spin-off. And I think when people like see photoshopped images or they hear Russell saying, Nissa should have a show. What if Romana gets a show or whatever? It's just kind of, I think people have that decent fear of, is it just going to be like scraps, like leftovers? And I mean, you don't have to watch it, sure. But I guess there's always that fear when it's not a victimless crime when you're overproducing stuff. I know it's a ridiculous way to put it, but it's not, because like, with the millions of Marvel things coming out, that directly affects the level of VFX they all get because so much is getting made. You can't just make endless stuff and think it's not going to impact on the quality. Like Big Finish is the premier example there. You got to be serious. It does affect the quality that all those writers have to write so many scripts a year. It is different than how it used to be when less was produced. If Disney Plus is, collab with Doctor Who, if we were to get 1 trillion spin-offs, you're dreaming if you think that's not going to affect the mothership show in some way.
See, while most of the spin-off talk is like conjecture on our parts, I think there is one brief mention in this magazine. I think they mentioned that one of the new characters, Shirley Ann Bingham is her name, will be. I think maybe Phil Collins. Someone says this. She'll be an integral part of the new Whoniverse, which that could just be localized to the main show, Series 14. But the use of Whoniverse as a term seems to gesture possibly to things beyond the show. I think maybe that's just how it reads to me. So there seems to be maybe like a vague suspicion that spin-offs might be in the works, even if it's not explicitly confirmed yet. I'm sure we'll have a discussion when it eventually gets confirmed.
You're totally right, Gig. Phil said there's lots more of Shirley to come as she plays an integral role in the new capital W Whoniverse. So unit spin-off,
Russell gestured at it when he talked about the episode length of Series 14 and the fact that there's going to be more episodes of Doctor Who each year than you're going to be able to gargle down, even if you wanted to.
Yeah.
I think so much of the question of whether spin-off works comes down to that clarity of vision. And on the Disney side of things, all their endless TV show spin-offs. TV, it feels like a real dirtying of what TV is when they take like a half an idea for a movie about Obi-Wan and they stretch it across 10 episodes of TV. It's very executive. It's very box ticking. It's very how many hours of content can we get out of one story meeting. And it's very not creator-led, which I think is the reason I'm not worried about Doctor Who itself, the show, is because that's very clearly being creator-led, and all the notes that we'll get onto talking about more, I'm sure, are small additions and notes on helping the creator himself fulfill a vision. That doesn't worry me. But the idea of there being these spin-offs not creator-led and instead fulfilling the remit of filling airtime when Doctor Who's not on, that's more worrying to me.
And plus, there is the fear that with RTD not necessarily being there forever, like where will things go? You know, will it become at some point a money milking machine when it stops being creator led, or at least as creator led as it is now?
What I'm thinking there is, I defend the first two series, especially the first series of Torchwood a lot. Like a lot of people say, you know, it only gets good in Children of Earth. I don't agree. But let's say I concede to you people who say that. Series 3 is when Russell really started actively showrunning Torchwood. The first two series, you know, he did one script and he did a teeny bit of Series 2 premiere, but Chris Chibnall was the hands-on, you know, basically showrunner role for those. And then he came on board with Children of Earth, and it was great. Everyone loves it. RTD was, you know, handling that. So that's interesting, isn't it? So when RTD is hands-on on one of the shows, it gets better. I haven't seen Sherlock, but I know a lot of people talk, I don't know how founded this is, but I know a lot of people talk of, well, this year, Moffat seemed to, you know, do a better job with one of these shows compared to the other. Series 5 of Doctor Who worked, and then Series 2 of Sherlock worked. I see, when you're as hands-on as, you know, these showrunners are in these crazy jobs, you can't clone yourself. You can't be three different doctors like David Tennant. So if we get a lot of spin-offs, this is why I don't think it's a victimless, you know, thing. Say we get a lot of spin-offs. If RTD isn't super hands-on with them and it's just super hands-on with Doctor Who, that's great. Presumably Doctor Who stays really solid, or at least really according to his ideas. Then what are the spin-offs going to be like? Are they going to be, you know, shakier the way that some people saw Torchwood as, or thinner the way some people saw the Sarah Jane Adventures as, or whatever class was, you know, or and if he does go work on the spin-offs more, you know, what's that? He can't be everywhere, basically. And so I think people have this idea that, like, you can have infinite content and it's fine because you don't have to watch it all. Like, there's a million Marvel things, but you don't really need to watch all of them to understand the next Avengers. So just pick and choose. But especially in something so figureheadish as Doctor Who, where the showrunner is such the key figure, I don't buy into this idea of like endless growth. I don't think it's...
See, it wasn't in this issue, but I think it might have been like, I don't know if it was last issue, but RTD at some point mentioned something about how it takes time to rebuild the Empire. And I just remember the Empire was the word he used. And it's interesting. I think a lot of fans love that idea of bringing back the Doctor Who Empire. We can go back to 2007. Yay, nostalgia. But at the same time, I find myself more concerned about, I just want a good show. I don't actually need a fucking empire of content. After 5 years of Chip, I just want the main show to be good again, please.
What you're saying there, this is exactly where, in the Day of the Doctor, the Tennant says, and I've seen that, and Matt says, and I never want to see it again. That's when people talk about the Empire. In my head, I see the Donna box set, the Christina box set, the Jenny box set. I see the Tales from New Earth. I see all those CDs in front of my eyes, and I think, is this what we want? Is this truly what we want? Maybe they do. And so the quote you're talking about, it's from December. Russell T Davies says, "It takes a while to get the Empire in shape. Cardiff's Wolf Studios are currently very busy indeed. Given what we already know about what's in store this year, I think it'll be worth the wait."
Yeah, I could just be misreading the Empire quote. He might just mean like the studio architecture of making the show, but I don't know.
I would be stunned if there are no spin-offs.
Oh yeah, there's spin-offs.
But, then again, I think it did work once. I think for a couple of years there, somehow, I wasn't the biggest fan of a lot of how it was being done, but Torchwood, Sarah Jane, Doctor Who were all functioning pretty well. Not to mention Totally Doctor Who and Doctor Who Confidential. We had 5 shows running pretty well. So it can be done. But it's just, it scares me.
In that sense, we can sort of tick off one of those spin-offs already with the amount of on-set filming for what looks like BTS stuff.
I believe it's going to be called Doctor Who Unleashed. That was a straight up mirror leak thing and also backed up by certain source.
I'm so happy it's an actual show and not just like a podcast.
Web exclusives, yeah.
Yeah. Web exclusives or like those showrunner podcasts. As good as all that stuff is, Doctor Who Confidential was awesome. It's, great to get an actual show again. So that's one spin-off I'm delighted to see.
See, there we go. I think that's the thing. It's very easy to... the idea of spin-offs, especially the idea of spin-offs in the same sentence as Disney Plus, is sort of horrifying because it's all sludge on Disney Plus. It's a sludgy platform. But the idea of a series of creator-led TV shows with their own ambitions and their own ideas, hopefully not just picking characters we already know and spinning them off. I think that could really work. I would hope it's not just Torchwood again and then the Joe Grant adventures.
Yeah.
But, the Don Noble adventures it would be, I suppose.
I think also, and this is, true to Disney Plus's Star Wars and Marvel and stuff, and it's true to Big Finish, is also the RTD Era 1 didn't do this so much. But I think when you have a bunch of spin-offs, and this is, this is from the comics world more than anything, is to commercially make this all work, the idea is you put shit in one of them, the people are like, oh, I got to do this other thing. I got to, who's that in this, River Song's in this box set? Oh, interesting. I guess I have to go engage with her stuff now. Or, that's the more cynical way. Or it could be, wow, I love River in this story. I should go check out her box sets or whatever. Or, Batman did something in this issue. I don't understand what's going on. Do I have to go buy the Harley Quinn comic? I guess I do. And then it's kind of I don't think RTD Era 1 did this really, but I
think they did it in some ways. Like the end of Torchwood Series 1 leads into Doctor Who Series 3 finale, doesn't it? And there are certain points like Freema turns up in Torchwood and it's here and there. It's not like constant, ever present. I would say it's subtler.
The way they did it wasn't demystifying though, I'd say. When I see the curator just show up in a random Kate Stewart box set, it's just like, I think it's like what Capaldi says about multi-doctor specials, isn't it? There's a certain magic you get from things not mixing. And I guess that's another fear of spin-offs is what if we dilute things by crossing over stuff all the time, which I think is a reasonable complaint people have about some, I'm not as familiar with the Marvel stuff as other people, but, I know some people think you're always putting in something else and, it changes the way you feel about certain things or whatever. It makes things feel flippant. I wouldn't want that as well because I've seen that and I never want to see it again. I hate all the River box sets that are all like, let's put River in this classic Who thing. Let's put River on this classic Who thing.
Put her in Talons.
Let's put River in this classic Who thing. Let's put River in Talons. Let's put River in Unit. And it's just like, Torchwood, I loved because it was, even some of its high points were where it was like explicitly saying this is why we're not Doctor Who, like Gwen in the last episode of Children of Earth. You need things to stand on their own two legs. And so maybe Russell will do this and pull it off.
Should we move on to the next interview bit?
Yes. Disney, I think, is that everything relevant with Disney? No, it's not. There's the other big Disney thing, which is to do with the big N. No, I can't say
the
that.
N word. I can say it, you can't.
You said it, not me. So from Scott Hancock's notes, let's turn back the page to the 585. So the December issue. In Scott Hancock, hey, there's another, he's from the Big Finish world. There's another little segue. He was from the Big Finish world, now he's in the TV world. In Scott Hancock's production notes for the TV show itself, in Doctor Who magazine 585, there's a point where he says, on Tuesday, the 25th of October, Hancock reports, back in the UK, interviews for the series' new assistant script editor take place in Cardiff, and a fourth draft of a Block 3 episode is delivered to executive producers. This draft has a reworked opening sequence. So that's before the January issue. But the relevant bit of that is just saying there's been a reworked opening sequence because, hey, that happens when you're making television. You rework things. Why do you rework things? Sometimes they don't work. Sometimes someone tells you they don't work, which is more what we're going to get into now. So in the next set of Hancock notes from Doctor Who magazine 586, on Thursday, the 10th of November, he says, new drafts, 5th and 3rd, of our Block 1 episodes are delivered, and I email across copies of all our latest scripts to the newly cast, but currently still unannounced, Millie Gibson. A new draft of episode 1 with a revised opening is also issued to broadcasters. Doesn't sound that weird. They changed an opening. Doesn't sound like a big deal. Why was the opening changed? Yeah, okay. The context of this is, do you remember months back, there was all that news that Doctor Who has, like in The Age of Empires or Sims or something, you typed in motherlode and then you got unlimited money. There was reports that Doctor Who had basically gotten that in months past. Disney bought Doctor Who or something and now they have, Marvel money. They have James Cameron money. They've got all the money in the world. They've got more money than Game of Thrones. There was all that kind of stuff was getting reported around. And so Ben Cook asks the producers, what's going on there? Is Doctor Who getting a bigger budget? What's happening? Russell says, yes, it's getting a bigger budget, but it's not the reported budget. Is this worth saying? Jane Tranter, I think it's really, really worth saying. I'd like us to say this. Ben Cook talks about the £10 million per episode thing. Is that legit? Russell says, that has been exaggerated. If that was the budget, I'd be speaking to you from my base on the moon. That is not the budget. And I worry that misinformation like that creates false expectation. Nonetheless, we have a lovely, handsome budget and we're very happy with how we're proceeding with it. And Jane Tranter says, yeah, it's a good budget, but it's not, it's not Thrones budget. Phil Collinson talks about, I'm essentially doing what I've always done. I'm always trying to save money. How many things can we have on screen at once? How much can we do? I'm not swimming in the motherlode cheat code money or anything. And Russell says, that's a good example of Disney notes. They sent us a note on episode 1 of series 14 that said, that opening isn't as much fun as the other episodes. It was a great note. So I've written a new opening. Phil interjects, an expensive new opening. Russell goes on, and it's broken everyone's backs. But it's absolutely worth doing. So we are, you ever see those images that are like, it's like negative thing, we are here. And then it's like more negative thing, more negative thing, more negative thing. I feel like it's kind of the frog in the pan kind of thing, isn't it? Initially it's, they're just distributing. Of course there's money from the distribution deal, but they're just distributing, guys. And then there's that little thing about a note, back last year. And we're like, well, people write notes to each other in class. It's not, it's not that weird. And now we're getting, well, we did change the opening because Disney said, but Well, the connection there is, Russell is saying this isn't like new. This happens to shows all the time. Everyone's getting co-productions, so this is happening everywhere all the time for television. It's not crazy. At the same time, what do you guys think of that?
So a lot of people were sort of vindicated by this, which I get. If you've been saying that Disney are going to have an impact, and then they measurably do have an impact. But it's also exactly the sort of notes you would expect a distributor to give, especially a financially contributing co-producer like Disney Plus. This isn't as fun as it could be. Have you thought about changing this opening? This is exactly the sort of note you would expect. And it seems like quite a big one. The opening of episode 1 is a big thing to change. But, Russell seems happy with the notes.
There is precedent for changing the opening of your first episode. Even Moff with his The 11th Hour, that was originally going to start in Amelia's garden. Then they added in that whole sequence of the crashing TARDIS right at the start. It was kind of a last minute thing.
Which is crap, so...
Yeah, it's kind of crap. But it's a very different tone to take for the opening. And it didn't lead to an entire crap... Well, some people might think it's a crap era. I mean, not everyone. But I think, regardless, changing the very first opening sequence of the first episode, it's not necessarily the biggest deal in the world. It's not as important as, say, changing the ending of your first episode. I think that would be potentially a much more pivotal kind of thing. So I think... And the fact that RTD responded to that note and describes it here as a great note, something that was in tune with what I guess they're doing, what they want. I think it's not I don't think it's some fatal destruction of creative intent here. I don't think it's the fact that RTD sort of went with it and kind of it suggests to me that the note complies with what they were going for with the series generally. I think if they'd intentionally wanted to go out of the way to have a much quieter, unfun opening, let's say the way the pilot opens at the start of Series 10, that's very low-key. It's just Bill Nardole, the Doctor, in an office, it's totally different. That's very deliberate. I think if it was something like that, then the note saying, make it more fun, would be more in conflict with that. Whereas I think if they get a note the other episodes are a lot more open, a lot more fun ways, this seems out of place, then, that suggests that, this is actually them trying to, I guess, help along RTD's creative goals in some way, if you see what I mean. So it doesn't seem that, fatal to me.
I think positive or negative, the pragmatic thing of it is, if this happens, like Russell was saying, it's not like Doctor Who never got notes. The, execs of the BBC would say, why are you doing this? Moffat... strains in those great Crystal D interviews, saying, I promised the BBC the Olympics. And then he's kind of suggesting, what a lot of people take to say, well, was he not able to use a certain actor for a certain role then because he'd promised a big thing? And was that part of why a big name ended up in the episode? I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's not like before Disney, we lived in this Edenic kind of version of Doctor Who where the showrunners just had these beautiful, pure visions of their mind, and they were made magically onto the screen through the little elves of Phil Collinson making everything work. And, that's not like how it worked before. It's not like Ray Holman had unlimited money to knit, every perfect costume for everyone, and no one ever said anything, and Chris and Stephen and Russell were just allowed to do whatever they want. That's not how it worked before. And so I completely agree with lots of the negative stuff about Disney. I'm not dismissing that in the slightest, but I also think it's like the BBC Worldwide Capaldi era thing, and it's kind of a lost battle on that. This, you get notes from everywhere, and of course there's more force behind it when there's so much money involved. But still, it's not like a totally new thing. I think the way some people are kind of taking it as, and also it is possible it was a good note. I'm sure they're going to give bad notes too, but it's possible that did actually improve it. I don't think now that he's got this big deal with him that Russ was able to blast Disney the way he did back in... Do you remember back in 2021 what Russell said about Disney when Loki, the Loki spin-off had a scene where Loki, I guess you can argue kind of offhandedly comes... Well, it's not really coming out. His bisexuality is mentioned in the narrative as he talks to his female self, as I recall it, in a bar or something. And a lot of people are like, this is awesome. It's Loki's bi, and we're getting somewhere. Us bis are getting somewhere.
We did it.
Feasting.
We mightn't have got, so and so, but we got Loki in the.
We've got a low-key bisexual.
Very fun. Very good.
Thank you.
And Russell, he's very cathartically says, well, he's talking about how TV drama commissioners want gay stories, and then he kind of blasts streamers a bit. He says, I think huge cleaning warning bells are ringing as the giants rise up with Netflix and Disney Plus, especially.
Ooh.
I think that's a very great worry. Loki makes one reference to being bisexual once, and everyone's like, oh my God, it's like a pansexual show. It's like one word. He said the word prince, and we're meant to go, oh, thank you, Disney. Aren't you marvelous? It's a ridiculous, craven, feeble gesture towards the vital politics and the stories that should be told. And then he says he's very worried about the future of LGBT plus stories on TV because streaming services will, quote, damn us with, quote, their condescension in the end.
Oh, God, I love RTD when he says stuff like this. So good.
No, I love him too. That's, jeez. The Loki showrunner responded to that.
Ooh.
Well, actually, the Disney Plus shows don't actually have showrunners. That's misreported. That's a whole other tangent. They don't have showrunners because... No, actually, this is relevant.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Disney Plus shows, at least the Marvel ones, which are the ones I'm most familiar with, do not have showrunners. They often get reported as having showrunners, but in every sense that we use the word showrunner to talk about, Doctor Who or other British shows, they don't. They have like head writers who, will handle the writing, the main jobs of the writing, they'll corral the writer's room and all that. And then they kind of finish the job, and then they'll have like a directors, and they might have a chief director who's, most important in the directing, but they don't have the writer continuing to like be the head producer during the actual production of the show, which is what a showrunner is. So it's one of those things. It's like when people say Verity Lambert is a showrunner. I'm like, I get what you mean. And so like functionally in this conversation, there's no big loss because I understand you're saying like very important producer with the big creative handle on the show. It's not like a huge crime is being committed here, but the showrunner means something fairly specific, and that's not what a showrunner is.
And in regards to the Disney Plus shows in particular, and sort of streaming shows in general, the fact that there's not a clear individual creative vision means that you get a lot of higher up executive creative controlling, which is how you get, shows that exist to set up other shows and tie in characters from other shows rather than telling their own story passionately.
It's not an accident that the Disney Plus Marvel shows don't have showrunners. Why do you think they don't have showrunners?
Well, I think, being able to have a firmer hand on the show, I think is probably something that is quite palatable to people higher up in the organisation. I think, also, something less to pay a particular person as well. Like, I'm sure there's that element too.
When they were making that Han Solo movie, reportedly one of the reasons the original directors were booted off is because they weren't... With these films, you're meant to get loads of coverage of everything. Because the more coverage you have, the more power the studio has in the edit, because you might have filmed your improv or whatever, but it's like, delete, we're going to use the stuff we want. You get loads and loads of coverage. They can do all the shaping in post, that they want. If you're filming, if you like throw out the script page, if you like go, this page isn't working for me, the actors have a better idea, let's film that instead, and let's not worry about the coverage. Imagine being the studio, then you're like, fuck, what can we do? We have to, do expensive reshoots to go get that scene or whatever. Or what if you can't? What if something happens that makes it impossible to get? You've lost power as the studio then, because you've got a creative person that's, enforcing a specific vision instead of getting all the building blocks that you can make the way you want. Showrunners, and this is what I love about New Who so much, is that it's such a centralized creative thing that this one person has this insane amount of power and control and vision across the whole show. Obviously, they're not the only ones. There's a million other hugely important creative voices in New Who, but it's abnormally centralized. I think everyone can agree it's abnormally centralized, and I think that's really cool. But it also limits the power that the people above the showrunner can have then, doesn't it? Because they've got such control of the show that you can't really fiddle around after it, because there isn't so much an after it, is it? Like, there's the execs above them, but it's all pretty much made by them. Handling it the way Disney Plus does it gives the studio much more power, because it's not like you have this one voice that can, it's centralized around the whole. It's not like the show is completely centralized around one person or two people or, one shared creative vision. It's not like that so much. It's a bit more sequential. And the less power you have to one centralized figure, the more power the studio can have in the edit and everything. So it's similar to what they do with their films, where they have, it's not altruism while they choose like relatively inexperienced with VFX indie directors to do so many films. It's not like they're out of the goodness of their heart saying, that guy made an incredible art film we saw at that festival. No matter what, we need him. We need him to do the next, whatever movie. It doesn't matter how much we need to train him up. We're going to put faith. That's not what's happening. You're delusional if you think that's what's happening. It's because they have less power. It's because, they owe it so much to Disney. It's because they're not familiar with the VFX stuff. So they're going to rely more on the previous stuff. All this stuff means you've got a director there, but there's so much the studio has control of compared to if they were getting, a much more established with VFX. I don't want to get too in the rabbit hole with all that, but you get what I mean, basically, is that the Disney Plus shows not having a showrunner, I think, ties into some of these concerns because, like Russell is saying, I'm such a showrunner that you don't need to worry because, I'm the Davis. I'm the showrunner. I have all the control. Don't worry about Disney having its claws on me, which I guess is founded because, these Disney shows don't have anything like Russell. They don't have any force like that.
Maybe that's part of why RTD felt he was needed, so to speak. This new landscape.
It's part of why it feels important that the whole production crew have come back, because as much as it's regressive by any definition, we also know that the working relationship between Gardner and Tranter and Russell is one where they produce that vision and obviously incorporate their own vision, but their role as producers isn't about reducing the voice of the showrunner, which it so often is in big franchise TV and filmmaking. I think it might be worth mentioning that obviously, so I think it's true that the force of RTD's creative expression of queerness is stronger than Disney Plus's financial imperative to reduce the portrayal of queerness, right? They wouldn't be working with him if they weren't comfortable with it being a queer show at all. I think that is true. I think it's also true that Disney will in some way express concern or try to erode at that expression of queerness. I think inevitably that's going to happen and there'll be pushback, and obviously that will be negotiated. And I have no doubt that in the long run it will be a very queer TV show and the queerest thing that Disney's been involved with in a long time. I don't doubt any of that. But I think it's worth noting that the information we get, especially through official sources and magazines and announcements from Russell himself, are going to be filtered through what looks good. I think it's worth bearing in mind that if Disney did give notes saying, "Oh, are you sure that we totally need these two characters kissing or whatever? Don't you think it would be better if we cut this character isn't super important?" If there were notes like that, which we have no reason themselves to think that there actually are, apart from, I suppose, Disney's track record. But we wouldn't be hearing about those notes if they exist, and I think that's it's probably worth bearing in mind as well. That there's a sort of information hole, a black box to it.
Also, as fans, I think we do tend to think about all of this stuff in terms of the show being the end product. But I think it's interesting to think about it the other way around as well. Like, we're making money for Disney now, and Disney likes to donate it to homophobic politicians. It's like, exactly. But that's not something that the producer of the TV show can really do anything about. It's just sort of a general economic, just grim reality that we're ensconced within.
I have a lot of bugbears with Disney. A lot. Storytelling wise, alone. But I'm also wary. I know some people are huge into the whole, as they call it, ethical consumption under capitalism idea. I know some people are huge into this idea that actually there's a way I can consume so-and-so and be a good person and it's good and everyone's happy. There's a way I can buy coffee and I've actually done a good thing in the world. I know a lot of people are huge on that and okay. But I'm wary I think when the way people are positioning it is like, well, we can't work with Disney because this happens, so we work with this people. But it's like there's no, these are companies. There's no like company that's actually bursting out rainbows into the world. You know what I mean? It's not like if they worked with Discovery or whatever, actually were making little kids' dreams come true in, so and so. Like I get a bit wary. Like I totally agree with a lot of the criticisms people make of certain companies, but I feel like there's a weird implication sometimes where it's like, so if we don't work with this one, it's good with this one, and it doesn't need to happen at all in the first place. Am I making sense? Do you guys kind of get the idea I'm toying around with here?
Yeah, I think so. Basically, I think there is something superficial about people's sort of maybe delusional ideas that they can just somehow have this ethically pure, perfect, like high budget TV production in year 2023, and just it can all be fine.
Yeah,
and likewise, also they can somehow make some real achievement by slagging off RTD or whatever.
Exactly. More broadly, I think it's obviously not possible to consume ethically under capitalism. I think the best you can do is not consume as much as possible, to give your biggest efforts towards not consuming. But people don't want to do that, and so there's this whole culture of making consuming activism.
Yeah.
I will only watch TV shows that have X number of queer characters. And sure, fine, whatever. If that's personally what you enjoy watching, absolutely fab. But that's not actually activism. It's just consumption of a different stripe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think this links back to something we were talking about at the start, where I was talking around certain Series 9 episodes, and I was talking about how I was wishing so hard that I could, jam the square peg in the round hole. I was wishing so hard I wanted it to be one way, but it was the other way. I was wishing so hard that I think people want that with this kind of thing as well. I am a good person because I watch Doctor Who, and all the clothes on Doctor Who were made, in wonderful little, beautifully air-conditioned rooms, and everyone was joyously happy and singing and holding hands there's this kind of idea that everything was perfect, and I can be the good person if I can consume the good things, and I buy the coffee that's more expensive. And it's like, I think there's this will to kind of assuage your own identity is good through consuming something you want to be good. And so then you become very vested in this idea of, I have to argue this thing is good. So by nature, I have to suppress things that position it as bad. And I think that ties into some of the weird discourses we get.
I think, arguably, maybe we saw a lot of that with Chip-Who. Some people's mentality over needing every single bit to be good.
No, this is just a very axiomatic thing that I think there's this idea of Doctor Who is an inherent good. And
yeah,
it's like, well, you met your husband in the Doctor Who fandom, and you made your best friends, and you got your job, and that's all great. You could have done that in the
Star Trek fandom.
Could have done that in the Star Trek fandom. Like, I'm not denying it. I'm in fact encompassing it into a bigger thing. Is that it's actually the humany-woomany bits of you that made that happen. It's not that Docky Who Blue Box made that happen. It's that you made that happen.
I just wish we could set a PSA into fandom saying that this isn't doing anything. This should be your reprieve. Having a TV show you like a lot should be a thing you can do to relax, and you can talk about the politics in it, but the show itself isn't making the world a better place. If you want to make the world a better place, you have to go outside and do that.
I guess I want to get onto a genesis of RTD2 thing in a second, but I guess it comes to me, there's a few different poles of how people approach the shows. Like, I don't like saying this word. I feel like it feels weirdly, I feel like the word politicized feels overly politicized for what I'm about to say. But I think there's a few different ways people politicize the show. I think one is a kind of depoliticized way where I do not mean at all that people see it as apolitical. I don't mean that in the slightest. But what I mean is that people kind of separate out their own political function from the consumption of the show, wherein I mean that someone might do very little in their life that's, actively front-facingly political, and they don't consider watching Doctor Who to be that either. Or there might be someone who's very active politically, one way or another, and they don't consider Doctor Who to be part of that. They might talk about Doctor Who in those terms because that's what they're familiar with. They might, think so-and-so, and they can bring that into their Doctor Who discussions, but they don't see, tweeting along the Runaway Bride as putting good politics into the world, or they don't see that as like activism, basically. And I think that's a very common sphere, is people who, I'm not saying the people are apolitical, and I'm not saying they see Doctor Who as apolitical, but I think they don't see watching Doctor Who as political. And then there's the people who do see consumption of Doctor Who as political. They see, by watching Oxygen, I am bringing the world forward into the Seventh Doctor's communist, utopia. That's what, by watching Oxygen and by tweeting about Oxygen, that Moffat quote about "to hell with history, we'll summon the better worlds by, believing in it together." It's like that, The more I watch Oxygen, the closer the telos of, communism is sought, or whatever. There's people who think that way. The more I watch Thin Ice, the less racism exists in the world. The more I watch The Timeless Children, the more that America's imperialism is mitigated.
It's like there's some sort of battle for the soul of culture or whatever, and Doctor Who is like the heart of that battle, and the battle for the soul of Doctor Who is kind of framed as like some sort of political battle as well. Like the idea, if we can get Doctor Who to have like good, positive politics, that will like ripple out forth, and that will have a generation of inspired socialist children. I think it's maybe slightly unrealistic.
Maybe it's worth clarifying that despite my skepticism of some of these ideas of viewing activism or some type of aspirational politics through consumption here, like by no stretch of the imagination am I an apolitical person or anything like that, whatever that means. There's people, especially in this realer, more fleshy world, quite aware of how political I am. But it's just this distinction of, it's a very ontological kind of debate, really. It's your classic idealism and materialism sort of dichotomy. I don't see the consumption of Doctor Who as aspirational or especially political in any real sense. And so some of my perspectives here might sound strange and apolitical and suspicious to people on the other side of that dichotomy, despite me being in a very real sense a very intensely political person in meat space anyway. So I understand why some people on that other side of this dichotomy might find the idea of someone not seeing the consumption of Doctor Who or the online interaction with Doctor Who as some hugely meaningful act of hugely political or aspirational act or anything. And so they might see that as suspicious, that kind of understanding of it. But I think it just comes down to different understandings and stances on what is political, and maybe more crucially, what is action, what is being active, what is activity. This is kind of getting outside our current purview, but I think lots of this relates into larger fandom and consumption debates over this sort of idealism, these nebulous sorts of understandings and mindsets towards action you see online. Like a lot of these ideas, which I'm beyond skeptical of, things like the whole premise of the streamer debate sphere, that sort of thing, the ever vaunted idea of ex-online personality converted some people to ex-politics. Hooray. Especially when that's even taken on its ground, especially when that's seen as some sort of internal end goal unto its... all that sort of thing. It all comes back to how, despite all nominally talking about the same things, Doctor Who and Disney and whatnot, we're all quite unique individuals, often with hugely different axiomatic views towards all sorts of things: society, fiction, action. There's a very rich multiplicity here.
I also think it's possible to think a TV show or media in general should be political, in the sense that if this exists for our entertainment, and it does, it should as well be doing what it can to inspire or whatever. But it's entertainment that it would be nice if it also did this other stuff. That's how I think about it. And it is not itself a cause. It's not itself doing anything. It's just entertainment that maybe has some good values as well.
I think there's a distinction also kind of between these two poles, in that there's also the ideal versus the material thing of some of these people who see Doctor Who as activism do it in a very idealistic way, where it's like, watching Rosa No, I don't know how to end the sentence.
Watching Rosa full stop.
There's people who see people who see listening to Rise Up as kind of an activism of its own, which is the very idealistic view of it's like the ideas are what matter. I've consumed the supposedly not racist idea, and bing, it's like a little ping of non-racism has entered the world, has spooled out into the world. It's like all ideas based. And then there's a more material way of looking at it where whatever you think of Rosa, Chibnall made an effort to hire more people from different backgrounds, from the show. And that actually is a tangible, he did actually do something political, you can call it there, in that he addressed what he saw as an imbalance that he wanted to change. And he actually did summon it up. So this wasn't a case of watching Oxygen and crossing your fingers. This was a case of going, I'm not happy with the kind of inequity of hiring here. I'm going to change it. And then he did. I think there's that kind of sense too. I'm trying to think of what the fan equivalent of that is. What is a material way of being a Doctor Who fan that enacts political change? I guess the charity things that sometimes happen, like the charity runs, let's all donate, whatever. There's got to be a better example than that. Is there any?
I'm not sure there is. The sphere of charity is like the acceptable zone of activism in Britain, I think.
There's got to be something.
I feel like there is.
Kind of material that fans do.
I suppose the sense of community, bring people together is a way into more real material change, but it's a bit loose.
Yeah, getting out in the real world and organising. That's Doctor Who fans can do that. We made the Yanto Shrine a real thing, so it's only one step up from there to...
Should we get back to the spine of this whole thing? Because there's more RTD stuff to deal with.
Yes, to talk about a very material thing. Al, this is the future conversation. We talked about RTD's production notes, which ended on a cliffhanger, you might remember, where he's talking about how RTD2 came together. It was all, we did the Runaway Bride tweet along, and, I just cheekily thought, what if we did more? David and Catherine, ha ha ha, what a humorous idea. But what if we did it for real? And, there was all those kinds of whisperings around. But Chris Chibnall is busy. God, the man has worked non-stop since Born and Bred, a very interesting show. The man has worked non-stop since the Phil Collinson produced Born and Bred. So we need to go above his... we need to talk to Piers Wenger to give Chib a break. I knew that Chris...
How magnanimous of them.
As Russell says, I knew that Chris was only doing 3 years as showrunner.
Interesting.
Well, he says I kind of knew vaguely that Chris was only doing 3 years of showrunner. 3 years, 3 seasons, 5-year gap. It's all numbers. Chris and I are old mates, blah, blah, blah. Precisely because of that, I'd rarely ask Chris about Doctor Who. He gets enough work texts and friendship is much more important. So I just thought, I'll throw out this David, Catherine idea out there. And since Chris is doing the busiest job in TV, I won't add to his workload. I'll email the director of drama, simply reporting in to ask, I have no idea about your future plans, Piers Wenger, but might this fit in somewhere? A special, the anniversary, an extra, a one-off, maybe? What do you think? An answer came back, just saying, that's interesting. Thank you. Let me get back to you. And then months passed, but that's normal for TV, blah, blah, blah. I mate, it's a sin until to be continued, blah, 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 blah. And that continuation is followed up in the Doctor Who magazines since. So, in Doctor Who magazine 586, he continues. He says, blah, blah, blah. Emily Cook tweet-alongs got me, David and Catherine talking. Let's make some new episodes. I just joked. Emailed the BBC. Early 2021, time passed. This is new info now. Every now and then, David or Catherine would text, any news? But to be blunt, it wasn't top of our lists. None of this felt real. Just an idle speculation. But then ping, an email on 25th of March from Piers Wenger, the BBC's director of drama, asking me to have a Zoom with him and Charlotte Moore, chief content officer of the BBC. Blah, blah, blah. The Zoom happened, and this is really interesting, what RTD says here, verbatim. So the Zoom happened and things were said, and frankly, no one would trust me at work if they thought every word was going to end up on this page. But more importantly, I cannot tell you what was said, because we talked about things you've yet to see, plans we are still unfurling, ideas that have not even begun. So that's interesting.
God.
Is he just talking up a unit spin-off, or who knows what he's got in store? Anyway, then he goes on to say, the BBC really loves the show, guys. Fans don't quite get how much they care about it. Russell says to see the show so deeply loved, it was great. It was exhilarating and inspiring and crucially fun. One part of the discussion is now widely known, the plan to partner the show up with a streaming platform. That was the BBC's idea, and that's how hugely they'd been thinking of Doctor Who all the way back then, and I completely agreed without a second's doubt. But one thing was immediately clear. They weren't just asking me to make an anniversary romp for the 60th. They meant running the show again. What? But that would be crazy. Don't be stupid. I've just written It's a Sin. I had a career. That meant I could go anywhere and do anything. Oh, yes, all right, yes. Seriously, I had to think about it. There were obvious doubts with everyone lining up to say, can lightning strike twice? But in truth, as I considered this show's future in a brand new TV environment with a mighty quest ahead, I thought, I'm needed. Yep, there are times in life when you have to put modesty, insecurity, and doubt aside and know what you are capable of. And then he talks about, it's not on my own. I have an amazing team. And here we are now. I have an office, Liverpool lesions, so on. I'm needed. You have to put modesty aside. What do you think of all that?
I think any saviour complex on RTD's part is going to be down to the position the show was in. I think the struggle Moff had finding anyone to succeed him, like they had to persuade Chibnall quite desperately. I think the idea that there wasn't a clearly defined future for the show, it was sort of adrift. There's that word again. I think it's also natural that RTD feels some ownership of the revival because he literally created it.
Yeah.
So I think so. I think this idea that him having done it, having had the credentials, he knows he can do it, and having the show just kind of floating off there, needing someone to guide it into this strange wilderness of a future. I think it makes sense, like why he feels this way, how he feels this way. I think, undoubtedly, RTD is not the only person in the world who could make a decent Doctor Who. But in terms of people who were there, who were ready, willing, and just able to just snatch it out and take it over again. Given the strange kind of, I guess maybe the lack of other people who just kind of grabbing at it, it just seems to fall back to someone like RTD who is in that position and just primed and just in a way still willing to go back in. Even the fact that he and David and Catherine all came up with that little plan, maybe we can do a 60th romp. So, just that alone indicated that RTD was still willing to go back into that mind space. So he was a candidate. I think it all kind of came together that way.
I think it's interesting how loose the recent magazines have gotten with the diplomacy with the previous era and the general state of the show. And is it Julie who talks about talking to Russell at an awards show or something, and he's complaining about what Doctor Who's not doing and how it could be better and how it should be better. And I just think that's interesting. I would have expected more of a more graciousness, I suppose, with the previous era.
That was the BBC Writers Festival, Wales 2019. There's a video of some of the stuff Russell said there. It was there that he started talking about, Doctor Who could be made this way and could be done that way. And that's when they thought, this is kind of the talk of a man who might do this again someday. Although Russell didn't think so back then. Yeah, he always stresses Chibnall as his friend. No one's doubting that. It's ridiculous to think otherwise, but you can be friends with someone and also think.
I think I do things differently. I think it is a fair way to summarise RTD's kind of point of view there. Not necessarily, ruined, but certainly RTD has ideas for how he would do it and how it could be done better, and he's going to put them into practice. So.
That that Writers' Festival was in 2019. It's not the first time he said it, but that's where Russell is saying the thing about I'm writing dialogue constantly in my head all the time that I mentioned earlier in this conversation. So there's another full circle.
Talks in the writer's tale about it as well.
Also, on this whole topic as well, it's worth remembering that Moffat said in 2022 that he knows a bit about what's going on with RTD2 and that fans shouldn't expect the same. He says, don't think you know what you're going to get. You don't. Davis wouldn't be doing this unless he could scare the living shit out of you. It will be good. And of course, there's a bit in the magazine where, Russell's saying we don't just want to repeat things. I mean, obviously the tension with all this is you've got David and Catherine back and David saying Alonzi in the teaser and stuff. Like, that's the funny tension with all that. But I don't think, even as wounded as the show is, I don't think he would come back if he couldn't do anything new with it. I think it's the new TV landscape that's kind of ignited him specifically here. The streamers, the dreamers.
In a way, there's something almost admirable about kind of refusing to hand everything over to the next generation. Just saying, you know what, I can stick it out, I can adapt. I'm like a shark moving through this new landscape. I think it's something quite interesting about a figure who has the power and the willingness to just do that and stick it out.
Just for specificity, it was Jane Tranter, not Julie.
Was it?
That said that quote. I'm just seeing it now. Jane said, I'd say I knew before the whole tweet-along stuff. Russell, do you remember you gave that really good speech at the BBC Writers' Room Wales Festival 9th December 2019, and we were chatting backstage before you went on and you started to talk about Doctor Who in a different way. You said, why wouldn't you do it like this and this? As you were talking, it was like you were laying out this vision. I thought, You never said you were. But I'll always remember that as the moment I thought Russell T Davies might do Doctor Who again. I didn't know how and I didn't know when, but that's when I knew.
So I was just going to say, in a way, it almost parallels him reviving the show originally. I mean, how long must he have been thinking, this is how I'd make Doctor Who if I made it again today? And that led to him actually doing it, being the person, taking the reins, saying, I can do this, I will do it. So it's all just happened again, except the show hasn't been off the air. This time it's been on the air. He's just had similar reservations, I suppose.
Yeah, so the thing about the Marvel-styled shared universes spin-offs, around the 22nd of January 2021, that came onto Twitter, and the Writers' Festival where Jane Tranter thought gears were in his head was December 2019. So Googling subconsciously for a couple of years, I guess.
So interesting, so early 2021, so that would have been shortly before he finally got the ping back from the BBC about potentially doing it again. So it was it was almost imminent at that point. Obviously he didn't know it was imminent.
It's probably worth the Empire word you fixated on earlier, Gig.
Oh yeah.
The specific Paul Kirkley Russell exchange about spin-offs is, so Russell says, I was in the middle of running an empire, and my God, I did that 10 years too soon, didn't I? There should be a Doctor Who channel now.
God.
You look at those Disney announcements of all those new Star Wars and Marvel shows, you think we should be sitting here announcing the Nissa Adventures, or the Return of Donna Noble, and you should have the 10th and 11th Doctors together in a 10-part series, genuinely. And I think that will happen one day. If we can just shift Doctor Who up a gear. Then Paul Kirkley says, even the Nissa Adventures? RTD says, yes, you laugh. But did Star Trek fans ever think they'd be getting a Captain Pike series ever? That's insane. The whole science fiction world is so creative and so money-making now. I think your wildest dreams can come true. Though that's already happened with Doctor Who. Here we are waiting for the Daleks to come on in prime time on New Year's Day. It's mad. Let's not take that for granted. That's mad. So if you want the Nissa Adventures, it'll happen one day.
Very interesting context for the Empire thing. I'm glad you brought that up. Interesting. So that I guess that almost quasi confirms that's how he thinks of the concept of an empire of Doctor Who, and that he's kind of getting it all running again.
Return of Donna Noble, the Nissa.
I feel that's more RTD just throwing out a name in that conversation. I don't think it's necessarily incredibly serious Nissa focus. But it's interesting, the idea of it being classic Who, almost getting a spin-off and being mined in that way is kind of in his mind there.
I think there's more juice in Classic Who than just the Sarah Jane Adventures. Although, like I think Oliver was saying, the Sarah Jane Adventures didn't work just because everyone liked Sarah. It's because it had its own ideas and its own format and its own audience and everything. You can't just take something out of Doctor Who and have it be its own thing. But he does say you should have the 10th and 11th Doctors together in a 10-part series. you know, who agrees with him are, or at least were, the 10th and 11th Doctors, who talked about that back in 2013, that, you know, they wanted to do more together. And the awful, awful, awful man, the man who killed Torchwood, the man who dashed Barrowman's dreams, the pig that ruined the show, said that shouldn't be happening. So that big bad wolf of his own shot that down.
Makes you wonder, has Tennant raised any of his suggestions with RTD regarding that? Obviously, Matt's busy with House of the Dragon now, but maybe when that's done.
I actually, I think the genie is well out of the bottle for like the sanctity of Doctor Who. We can only have one Doctor doing I think at one point I was very, very in agreement and open to that kind of argument that we need a strict telos and we need, you know, one Doctor at a time and we don't mix and we can't. But now it's like, you know, with how wacky regenerations are now and every, you know, there's a million, you know, there's this and this. This isn't a timeless thing at all. I think this actually originated with RTD. But now I think the sanctity is a bit gone from, you know, the wonder of we have one Doctor at a time and the regeneration is very sequential and there's a huge magic specific to... And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Like, you know, I love Jo Martin's Doctor. I think she's awesome and I wish she gets more stuff. You know, I don't mind that we've interrupted the kind of telos of the progression now. So a 10th and 11th Doctor spin-off, I would like it. Oliver, what do you want to say?
Yeah, telos is totally dead. You're right. And I think that's fine. You know, I can see the argument for holding on to it, but it's gone now. So
it had a good run. It had a very good run.
Doing old Doctor spin-offs alongside the new ones, why not? I think that's fine. If you, it has the same potential to be sludge as anything else. But it could well work. I'm not against it as an idea. I think it's endlessly interesting that, the collapse of that telos started with the 10th Doctor regenerating into David Tennant and has climaxed with the 13th Doctor regenerating into David Tennant, and then each era in between added a little something into it to break it further.
It's not Chibnall with the Timeless Children that did this at all. He's just another link in the chain. This all started with... I mean, you could go even further back, maybe, but I think it really started with the fake-out regens under RTD, and then, you know, Moff compounded that with all sorts of stuff he did, and then Chibnall compounded it. I think it's silly to just go, Chibnall, you ruined that. No, he didn't. You can have issues, and I have issues with what he did with the Timeless Children, but it's not like he came up with the idea of what if we inserted a bunch of random regens, or what if we treated regeneration a little more flippantly.
The Morbius Doctors took a shot at the telos. It didn't work. The telos held in place. Everything sort of carbonized and solidified around it. But then... it was used. The Morbius Doctors then came back and were used to just break it down a bit more. But I think 10 again's the absolute breaking point of it. And after doing 10 again, you can do any old Doctor coming back in any form ever, and it doesn't really matter.
I think the lead up to RTD2 also is showing that it actually is totally workable to have two kind of incumbent Doctors at the same time.
Yeah. And
be appropriate with the limelight. Like, I think they're handling this really well now, where Tennant is the incumbent, but Shooty is eyes on Shooty, guys. Shooty is the actual, you know. Tennant is 14, but Shooty is the actual one we're, you know, deferring to in the media and everything. So I think that shows that there's a model that you could have a McGann miniseries or whatever running and not give him all the attention. I think it's totally achievable, and we're seeing it being achieved right now. I think the best complaint with, no, you can't have another Doctor on a spin-off at the same time, well, not literally the same time, like in the same year as, you know, Doctor Who, is that, well, what's the difference? This is, you know, where I think a lot of Big Finish spin-offs don't work, is when they're just Doctor Who with a different character. You know, it's Doctor Who, but with so-and-so character being the Doctor. And I think those tend to not work as well, at least for me, because then it just feels like offbeat Doctor Who scripts a lot of the time, and not kind of the uniqueness of like the weird shape that Jacoby Master stories have or whatever, which is nothing like a Doctor Who story. Whereas so-and-so spin-off character is basically getting a Doctor Who story. And then it's harder because Doctor Who is diluted and whatever. But I think that's conquerable. Like, this idea doesn't excite me personally. It would have once. But the whole Paul McGann Time War miniseries, that idea... I get it, because it's like, well, the main show isn't in a surreal, devastating landscape of war and conflict. The main show is more of an adventure show. So if we have Paul McGann and your Toby Whithouse, grimdark, Doctor, you've done something wrong, like guns, whatever, that would be distinct from the main show. And so that wouldn't cannibalize it. As for 10 and 11, what if you gave him what if you forced Moff to do it? What if you said, for your crimes of trying to deny it, you've got to do it, and you've got to make it like coupling. You've got to do a sitcom with Matt and Tennant. You've got to have their doctors in. You've just got the TARDIS set, and it's got to be a sitcom. I think that would be fantastic. That would be distinct from the main show. So there's ways to do it.
If you did it as a big tied-up identity farce, it could work. But yeah, you need a new flavour, absolutely.
It's like the minisodes I know we love, Oliver, like from the Matt era. Like, why not have the spin-off? Like, Disney Plus has little shorts miniseries, like the Groot ones or whatever. Like, get a minisode every week or every month or something. And like, that's its own thing. Like, I think there's totally ways to do a Doctor spin-off that isn't just we're doing the main show, but we're stretching ourselves thin and doing 2 of the main shows. There's ways to do it. It doesn't need to be done, but it could be done.
The Tennant trilogy is sort of that. It's setting out a version of Bring Back an Old Doctor for a new kind of adventure. It's probably going to be more similar to a regular Doctor Who adventure than I would like a spin-off to be. But, it's showing how in a little boxed off bit of the show, and it's not being confused with continuing continuity, because we know that although it is happening in the present, it mostly concerns stuff from its own era, and we know objectively that Ncuti's coming next, and that's the show being made currently. It's a good way of going, look, you can revisit the old ideas if you really want. They can be their own thing. On
the note of having more than one Doctor running around at the same time, I also think part of that is a symptom of just the different way people engage with TV and media now, and with all the I think the multiplicity of all the different screens and being able to rewatch old episodes more and have kind of social media feeds of them making the next series and all that stuff like that, and that is so different compared to how it was, during say Classic Who or whatever. So I think the whole idea of like the telos and you must have one Doctor at a time. This is the present. This is the incumbent. This is the now. I think that was so ingrained through the history of the show just because of the nature of how it was made and how people engaged with it. And just as TV changes, as media changes, it opens up this thing of just, you can have more than one Doctor going at once and it doesn't really make that big of a difference.
Yeah. I loved that telos, but like it had literally a over 40-year run of pretty much working. So I don't mourn it because I'm like, well, it worked fantastically for a long time. So, great. We're in a different era now. It's not like it got snapped. It's not like it was Hartnell to Trown. It wasn't like that. And then, now we've gotten the 6B Doctor and now we've gotten the Morbius Doctors. We had a huge run of basically being pretty sequential. And so, great. What I think would be interesting is, I know sometimes the Christmas specials, people are like, we're running out of ideas for Christmas, which is fair enough. Well, I've thought it would be interesting. What if you stopped making the Christmas special like the incumbent Doctor and the main showrunner is doing a big important episode? What if you threw it out? Not like that. What if you threw it open and was like, another writer can do it, maybe even a big guest writer, like a big fancy writer, and they can use whatever Doctor they want. What if you said, oh, Edgar Wright, do you want to use Matt for a Christmas special in 2026 or something? And he was like, yeah, and they did. I think that would be interesting. Just, an idea of, opening up, getting a bit more anthological with Doctor Who a bit, I think would be fascinating.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm sure that in 30 years, there's going to be a big snap back and someone's going to go, no, we're back to one Doctor happening in the present, and it'll get rebooted, probably literally rebooted. But for now, this is a fun shape for the show to be, I think. Why not?
Yeah. Imagine Eccleston... imagine Eccleston coming back, but it was with Joe Ahern, so he was happy with the direction, and it was with... I know a writer Eccleston loves. This would be very interesting. What if...
Damon Lindelof?
Yes.
I'd watch it.
Damon Lindelof writing, Eccleston gets a Christmas special, an actual Christmas special at Christmas. Imagine that. Imagine how exciting that would be for everyone. Lindelof gets to just do a one-off thing without having to integrate into, all the big plans and, sequence of the show. Eccleston gets a bunch of money. And Joe Ahern, I'm sure he'd enjoy doing that. He loves working with Eccleston. And the fans would go bananas. The fans would be off the walls, bouncing with pure joy. Why not? The dam is burst open with the sequencing. Like, why not bring a little more joy into the world? I think something like that would be a beautiful thing. I'm all for it. So, the first person Russell told about RTD2 going to be happening was, of course, Julie. Julie says, I remember Russell calling me and doing a, what do you think? And I had a very mixed response. My first response was joy, hooray, oh my God, this is mad, hooray, and yes, yes, yes. And then I vividly remember saying, but are you sure about going back? Because Doctor Who had meant so much to us, outside of the work. It was more, do you want to go back emotionally? And Russell had the best response. Talk about cutting straight through all the nonsense. He said, I'm not going back. I wouldn't be interested in going back. I'm going forward. We're not simply going to do Doctor Who every year in the same way. It's a much bigger proposition. That reminds me of the quote Gig mentioned, where Russell's like, we're gearing up, forgive the lack of episodes for now. Much bigger proposition. And then Phil Collinson talks about crying, and it was all very emotional, coming back together. Bad Wolf is big studios. Disney stuff we already discussed. Blah, blah, blah. Is the show still going to be British? Yes. Yeah. And I think that's enough of the RTD I'm needed stuff. And it folds into, we're circling back around, it's really completely normal, these American co-producers. If you want any more reassurance, let me just tell you that we're about to transmit the words Mavic Chen on television for the first time since 1966. And there's a little picture of Mavic Chen next to that bit of the Ben Cook interview. Who is Mavic Chen? Define Mavic Chen.
Classic Who lore, and that's all you need to know. That's the identity of the show, guys. Classic Who character.
What if I wanted to know more?
You don't want to know more.
Mavic Chen sounds like an interesting name. What sort of character is that?
I'm sure he's just some random, I don't know, Victorian character, or just some completely ordinary, nothing remotely notable at all. Just like Beat the Meat, just completely harmless, innocent little bit of classic sort of apocrypha.
So, Mavic Chen was a villain in the very early black and white days of Classic Who. An actor called Kevin Stoney, a white man, portrayed this role. The character wasn't positioned as white. The character was positioned as...
almost sort of ethnically ambiguous in that way, isn't it? That you often get with villains sometimes.
Yeah, that classic sci-fi, vaguely Asian scary. It's quite a portrayal. It's not good.
They gave him an epicanthic fold, so that's, that means they're trying to make him look Asian. White hair, they darkened his skin. As with anything like this, he has a veritable army of defenders online who come with every, you do blackface or yellowface, and you're going to get an army of Doctor Who fans forevermore that, actually, this was actually all perfectly above board and good, and you should shut up. And this was great, and we all love it, and Classic Who, and look at my figurines. And it's like, it's not quite the level of Talons, but it's a very defended maneuver by the type of people online to be using the words Mavic Chen in the 2020s, which now includes Russell T Davies. So I guess that's the latest RT discourse, is just a bit of Chengate, which is like people being like, Russell, you scallywag, you don't talk about Mavic Chen. That's a bit of history we'd like a bit more forgotten, because it was yellowface, and so it was wrong then, and it's wrong now, as people say. Russell, you've bringing back the celestial toy maker, it seems, and you're talking about Mavic Chen, and I've rewatched Turn Left recently, and Russell, I'm getting a vibe off you that I'm not loving.
Then you have the unicorn and the wasp quote from Writer's Tale. You know, it's all kind of a big grab bag of racism returns.
Yeah. So it's just one of those racist the Davies cycles, I guess, is going on. But I mean, like, yeah, sure. Like, sure. It's weird to bring up Mavic Chen.
I think also just the breathless, like, the way in which he brags about, oh my god, yes, we're referencing Mavic Chen. This is the show you know and love. Like, I think it's a risible habit that Doctor Who fans, they brag about references as if references are the heart and soul of the show. And it often precludes the ability to look back with any sort of critical eye or self-awareness. So, as far as in the wider scheme of things, I think an episode name-dropping Mavic Chen, I think is fairly trivial. There's some probably stupid, wanky reason to do it, but like just the sheer breathlessness with which RTD cites it here, like it's some great achievement, and like this is just like the quintessence of Doctor Who, the ability to reference Mavic Chen and print a picture of a guy in yellowface as Mavic Chen because it's from the 60s, and that makes it awesome in the Doctor Who magazine. It's like, oh my god, it's exhausting. I think I can totally see why people are just mad and just exhausted with this shit, you know?
It does feel like he's trying to assuage the wrong audience here by going, don't worry about our affiliation with Disney, we're gonna put Mavic Chen on TV. It's to a lot of the people criticizing the Disney deal and stuff, that's not helpful.
Yes, the idea that people are worried Disney would censor classic Who wanky references, I mean, it's completely off base, isn't it? It's got no grounding at all.
Don't worry about Americanization. Don't worry about us affiliating with Disney. We're doing wanky references. Disney would never let us do wanky references.
You know, I don't want to get too personal into Chengate, but something that really annoys me with these sorts of discussions is like when people are like, hey, well, yeah, it's bad. They might even flat out say it's racist. That's all bad and we condemn it now. Let's do better. But it was the 60s. And so back then, people thought it was okay. And it's like you've kind of tipped your hand there, haven't you, when you say people? It's like back in the 60s, it was those days when it was just us whites, you know, there was no one else to complain. And then Asian people joined Britain in, when did I start seeing them on TV? You know, blah, blah, blah. They joined in the 90s or whatever. And then people started complaining about Mavic Chen and, oh yes, that was very fair enough. You know, I'm a good boy. I do my bit of activism. I watch Oxygen every week. And so, yep, we agreed Mavic Chen was racist then. And so now we say, you know, it's wrong and, you know, we'll never do it again, blah, blah, blah. But back in the day, it was the 60s. And so there were no Chinese actors around. There was no one Asian in Britain. There was no one we could have hired. And it was actually okay to, it was all, you know, that's how it was back then. And my grandfather was a good old bloke. And so we're all, you know, it's all good. It's just like, it's the kind of obsequious, like, I'm not racist because I blah, blah, blah. But I think it's because it's not the open racism of like, fuck off, you know, it's Mavic Chen's totally fine. Stop whining, you SJW. It's not that. It's almost kind of more irritating in some level of just the kind of, you get the implication that they don't really see, like, it's like forgetting, you know, Asian people existed, or it's like forgetting that this, were racist things okay when less people thought they were racist? It's like a very weird kind of solipsism. Do you know what I mean? Like it's this kind of racism by default thing of just not kind of conceiving of not everyone was like you then.
It's like a time-traveling temporal version of the I have Asian friends so I can't be racist. So excuse them doing it with like time periods.
Yeah. I hate that. The other thing I hate, I mean there's a lot, but another one that really annoys me specifically is, hey, I saw somewhere online there was a guy and he was Chinese and he said it was okay. And so over 1 billion people have been represented by this one fan. And now when I watch Talons, I'm being a good boy and it's all totally above board. And I have a toy of the giant rat and everything's fine because I saw a bloke online and he said, I'm allowed to watch it. Which is, I think it's kind of the other side of the coin of like, it's a very dehumanizing thing fundamentally, isn't it? It's like, I got my pass to enjoy Mavic Chen's shout out in RTD2 because a guy said it, and this one guy means everything to me. You know,
the endless quest to find someone who will give you the racism pass.
Yeah.
Like the whole pass for racism.
It's that framing of conversations about racism as fundamentally a threat to your ability to enjoy your favorite TV show, as if that's the real crime of these racist portrayals, is that they take away the Dalek master plan from you, and you can't be without that. So we need to find a way that it's okay. Or, you know, it's a different time, and so it's okay for me to uncritically enjoy it now. And I don't really care about telling people off for watching and even enjoying something as horrifically racist as Talons, but I think the whole framing of it as fundamentally about your enjoyment, and the fact that you feel told off for enjoying something, and that's the problem, is so limited in its perspective and so deeply white.
The denial is, I think, actually the kind of dog whistle or the red flag raiser. Like if I think the point is, it looks like more of a red flag if you try and split hairs, because that's you're not admitting that, you know, something is racist. You're trying to say, well, this guy said it's not, or well, actually, no one. It couldn't be racist because only white people were around back then or whatever. And then it's you're not. It comes back to that Series 9 thing, the Series 9 denial I was talking about at the start, where I'm like, no, I have to make it fit, I have to make it work, and I'm denying reality to do that. These episodes have to be good. I have to make it. I have to find a way for me to think they're good. It's, you know, the same thing. Then I'm a loser because I'm not admitting, well, I don't actually think they worked. You're a loser if you're trying to, you know, say it's not racist because this guy said it. It's not. Or, you know, it's not racist because I forgot that Chinese people existed in the 60s as well in Britain. You know what I mean? It's like, if you admit it, then it feels like the person's more normal. But if you deny it, it just looks like you kind of are being weird.
Yeah, seems so defensive. You know, I totally agree with what Oliver said about how, you know, I don't really care massively about telling off the Talons watchers, but like the kind of conversations and discourses that arise when people feel they need to defend like these old stories and go to bat for them, oh, they weren't really racist and all of that, what that creates is a sphere where racism is propagated, and people are just, people have to wade through this swamp of racism getting like huffed around everywhere because people are so desperate to make themselves out to be like good people and like denying the racism in their favourite TV shows. You know, it's so that's the really bad aspect. It's like when you get someone trying to shut down conversations and criticism and like analysis of the racism, you know, putting like a note at the start of Doctor Who magazine saying, "Oh, it was a different time," and, you know, just like swamping out any of the actual discussion. That's the really bad thing, because it just adds to the fog of racism.
I find it very confusing that people so struggle to go, I think this part of a thing is good and this part of a thing is bad. You can do that. You can go, Talons is quite well-paced and also horrifically racist, and the horrifically racist doesn't cancel out the fact that it's quite well-paced, but we shouldn't celebrate it uncritically.
I think it all just gets very personal, I think. If for people to acknowledge that they may have like missed or not perceived like the racism or the bad thing at one point, they suddenly feel that that's an attack on them, and like, oh no, I can't allow this to be true.
It's this circles back to our self-identification, you know, consumption, morals, politics stuff we were talking about earlier. I think a lot of people will be able to relate to this. Have you ever been in a situation where someone is like, oh, have you read X book or have you read X movie? And you're like, yeah. And you haven't, but you kind of want to be the person who has, or you want to be seen as the person who has, but you, and so then you might waddle through the conversation really kind of awkwardly and just trying to do your best of like faking it. And it's like rather than admitting you have something to learn, or letting someone kind of in to have the joy or the condescension, or letting someone in to kind of have the, oh, you haven't, well, let's talk about that. It's that, no, I have to be complete as a person. I have to be finished as a person kind of thing. And I think that's a similar thing where it's like, I can't think the episode was good and also had racist bits, because then I'm a
racist, that famous noun.
Yeah, a racist. Do you get what I mean with the comparison to like, I'm a finished person?
Yeah, I think it is like it's a threat to someone's sense of self, and especially with racism is a special case of it, because that then their own like race, literal self as like a person gets brought into it, aspects that they can't control, like their skin color.
The kind of threat to yourself is, but if I missed if people are saying so and so was bigoted in this episode and I missed that, is that meaning I'm a bigot and I'm bad and I'm evil and this can't be happening? I'm in charge here, and then I've got a square peg round hole. I've got to make the episode not racist to preserve, and I get that because it's a big threat to the ego in lots of ways. But you are racist, like of course you are. Just you got to rip that band-aid off at some point. Like it's more racist to think I've never been racist. The idea, like the mere idea that you could be totally free from racism, like you're in some deprivation tank, totally isolated away from, you're vacuum sealed away from internal and external racism. It's just so insane and self-righteous. It's so individualistic. Like it's so not actually thinking through the lives and histories of people around you. It's such an individual, I'm perfect, like vanity, like very self-focused thing. It's it's like a self-tell that you understand these sorts of things much less than you might be positing.
I am the least racist white person on Doctor Who Twitter.
Exactly, right?
Yeah, and I think it's understandable. Yeah, that fear of I cannot admit I cannot have been racist ever. I have to actually. It's the paradoxical thing of I have to kind of be racist to stop myself seeing myself as a racist. It's very interesting psychologically, I guess. But yeah, I think you're right. It's like that evolution of a person thing. I can't admit that I haven't seen The Godfather or something. I can't admit that, oh crap, maybe they have a point about turn left and I never perceived that. I can't learn. I need to be complete all the time, which is a very boring way to go about things. But it's like, I understand because they're very understandable things to be insecure about. Absolutely.
Just the absolute ludicrous idea that you could be brought up in the 20th or 21st century United Kingdom and manage to somehow dodge through all of your upbringing any, racist ideas, any bits of psyche you didn't want, that zero bad ideas impressed upon you in your life, or that you have somehow purged all of them. But people, it's made so inherent that people talking like this don't even think about the fact that you can have biases and then expunge them or work on them or try to correct them, because the idea that you ever had anything in you that wasn't absolutely ideal, the idea that you ever had any inclination towards a very racist episode of Doctor Who feels like a personal attack. So you have to make up this fantasy where you manage to avoid any bad biases in your upbringing or anything else.
It links to what we were saying earlier about if your sense of like political identity is tied to your consumption of Doctor Who, this is a huge deal, more so than it might be for us. Because if my politics is watching Oxygen and then later someone tells me something in Oxygen was racist, fuck. Then what? Have I become a Nazi, overnight? Like I can see why it's such a threat to people. If they see the consumption of Doctor Who as not just a big part of their identity, which I understand, but a big part of their political identity, then I really get it. Like if am I any better than a NMD if I enjoyed the Rat in Talons? Does this make me filth? It's like, I think you need to step outside. you need to
touch grass,
undramatize, I think, your consumption of Doctor Who a bit. I mean,
touch grass.
We're all Doctor Who obsessives here, but it's not your political identity, I would hope.
No, I would say just regarding Chen Gate, I'm kind of pleased that stuff like this gets some pushback in fandom. Like, not in the sense of like, oh, RTD's the gremlin, we must end RTD2 now. I think I think just stuff like RTD breathlessly bragging about Mavic Chen. Like, I think people can and should like just point out how ludicrous that is, because it's just not the thing.
This is the over dramatization of like the discourses, which I love from a distance, but it's like I saw a lovely tweet, a tweet I treasure, which was to the effect of, I think it was someone noticing I don't think it was Chen Gate, I think it was the 10 Little Agatha Christie gate of, Precious Russell T Davies was the one wanting to inject a line that a lot of people would read as racist into the Unicorn and the Wasp script. Not the episode's writer, who people can do their own...
Condemnation? Criticism?
who they have their own focus on. But Precious Russell the Davies, not racist the Davies, Russell the Davies, the beloved Russell T Davies, was trying to put a line in that I might see as racist. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? I know this came out a long time ago, the episode and the writer's tale, but what do we do? And so I saw a great tweet, and I'm not bagging out this person. I thought it was really sweet in its own way. But the tweet was something like, guys, I'm worrying. I think it's time we cancel RTD. I'm wondering, do we have to cancel RTD? He tried to put a racist line into Unicorn and the Wasp. I'm really worried between this and recent Disney news, we may have to cancel RTD. Which is there a big red button we press somewhere and he's cancelled? What will that do exactly? Does Chris come back to the show? How do we? What is the cancellation of Russell achieve? Do we make him atone for his words and deeds? Does he have to do let's get him to do a Barrowman style apology for the I get the Christie joke. That would be that would be something. But yeah, all these discourses about racism and apologies and cancellation are such a fascinating sphere.
I do think generally there's been, over the years, there's been maybe some mystification of RTD, being the guy who brought back the show and, this precious, perfect RTD. So, and I think a lot of what's being sort of dragged into the limelight, or things that RTD is saying or whatever, is kind of, more and more as RTD2 continues and he's the present showrunner, that mystique will be dented a little bit, and I think that's probably a good thing, because it just lets everyone get more of a sense of what reality is, rather than their own kind of pure, perfect little fantasy versions of RTD. So I think it's a good thing overall.
If you want some chaos strewn around, or if people want a bit of excitement in their lives, I would suggest going back and watching Queer as Folk from Russell. And while you're at it, go watch my favourite Stephen Moffat show. Go and watch Joking Apart from Stephen Moffat, and you'll have a plethora of incredible discourses like you've never seen before.
Yeah, space them out, release one per month, yeah? We can have a whole rolling cycle of them, yeah?
You will have an incredible feast of discourses. If you thought these ones were something, Queer as Folk, Joking Apart, Series 2 specifically, go enjoy. Because, there's a lot there. And for Chibnall,
maybe not Born and Bred itself, but that certain document that relates to Born and Bred, that might be irrelevant.
Yeah, we were talking about Nazis earlier. Yeah, there's a Nazi Born and Bred thing we'll get into eventually.
What?
It'll make sense eventually.
You're going to love it, man. It's so good.
How deep down the Doctor Who iceberg rabbit hole is this?
Very deep.
I have a few just stray thoughts before we close. First is, so Kate Stewart is back.
All right.
Yay.
Sure.
That's my favourite character. That's...
all right.
I love UNIT. You know what I really love about UNIT is the more we divorce ourselves from them having very specific dynamics and characterizations and arcs like we had in the 70s, I hated that. I like him being a bland, militaristic organization that goes shooty. I think that's much more enjoyable. And hopefully Shooty will get to...
Friendly militaristic organization.
Let's hope Shooty gets to go shooty with them and they get a spin-off of their own. And that sounds fantastic to me. I couldn't think of a more dynamic, thoughtful, engaging, brave, considered actor than Gemma Redgrave to really bring a dynamic, wondrous, exciting character to life. Because I don't think she's had many opportunities to show us what she's got. She's, been in very few episodes of the show, very few minutes of the show. So she's had no chances to show us.
Yeah, very few eras of the show.
Very few times to show us if she could do anything interesting with the role. So I could not be more excited to see this incredible character return.
You know who I miss? I miss Osgood. It was nice having more than one character related to UNIT. That was nice.
No, that was a bit too 70s. I don't like there being dynamics in unit. I like just Kate and some nameless soldiers, please. That's what I would like. So Kate's back. There's also a Welsh politician who you guys are going to have to help me out here. People keep assuming this character is the Master. Yeah? Why?
Because he looks a bit stern.
And RTD is going to do the Mr. Saxon plotline again, verbatim, because he's definitely not developing his approach in any way.
Everyone's got fandom brain rot and everyone needs to be someone. It's going to be really funny if he is actually.
Yeah, that would be the best outcome. I would love the egg on my face. I hope he is the Master and I look like a huge fool. I would adore that.
I think fans have a compulsion to try and solve things like before they officially happen. So trying to work out which character will be revealed as the Master. I think it's that crossing over with their desire for familiar things to come back and for things to be explicable, understandable, old characters returning. Yeah, fan brain.
I've seen some people think his name has to be an
anagram?
Anagram, because it's got that weird thing in the middle. That's not like a name.
It's just Welsh.
and that is Welshophobic.
He's just a Welsh guy.
He's just a Welsh dude. It's not an anagram. I mean, maybe, but like, it's not a weird name.
It's got a G in front of William. That's a code.
William, he's the new first Doctor. Gwilliam. It's all coming together. We have the Hug Slug, who looks gorgeous. Big, lovely, real, non-CGI monster that looks just amazing, characterful, and it moves. Just beautiful.
The way those little tentacles just kind of wiggle impotently left and right, I think is the funniest aspect of it.
Huggo Sluggo's made my month.
Yeah, I'm enormous fan of the Slug.
Such specific Doctor Who-y vibes as well.
Anyway, with Time Heist, it had a big snail dude who, I'm not a huge fan of the episode, but that guy looked awesome. That was a real, head. Like it was all real. It was all real. That was really moving. They actually built that. And you can feel it on the screen. Just beautiful. It's so fantastic when Doctor Who. I remember back when there were set leak pictures for Rian Johnson's Star Wars film way back in the day, and people for the casino stuff, and people were saying, "Oh, it looks like Doctor Who." Some people in a very disparaging way, and some people in an excited way. But just because it was all these wacky aliens that they didn't look like the most expensive thing in the world, but they were all real and they were in the flesh.
Physical little guys.
That's just a gorgeous thing with Doctor Who. There was some impressive CGI in Chris's era, like the Scorpion things looked all right. And, often there's, the integration, like Beep the Meep is like a real body and it's like a CGI face. But, as far back as Classic Who, the Zarbi and everything, I just love real in the flesh monsters. Whether they look a bit ropey or not, huge joy of the show for me. So I love the Hug Slug. I think he looks fantastic. Genuinely.
That big envelopment, giving passers-by big hugs that do something scary. It's very Doctor Who-y. And how it ties to everything else, who knows, but fun.
There's also another new character and actor in the show, which is Millie Gibson, the 18-year-old from the soap Coronation Street, as the character Ruby Sunday, who some are alleging is Kate Stewart's daughter because
she's blonde. Yeah, that's literally it.
Again, we may have egg on our faces here if she actually is, but for now, I think they're just both blonde.
It doesn't seem very RTD at all to do the companion as a special individual with some important family.
Some interesting things with Millie. So there were 6 scripts written of the new Doctor Who when Millie was cast, and they thought they would probably get someone young for it, but there wasn't we need white blonde girl. 6 scripts written, would be young, but they were pretty open. Not as open as they were to the Doctor casting though, so that was opened up to, they had one non-binary actor and they also had a bunch of men and women read for that. And they thought they were going to go youngish, but they didn't have, much other preconceptions. So they say about that. But for Millie, for Ruby, I guess it was just youngish and a woman. I don't know if there's anything else specific.
Millie gave a kind of a description of how she sees Ruby and 15's relationship, and she mentioned they're like giggling schoolgirls together, and I think that's very telling. I think because it doesn't quite sound like a take that certainly New Who was like really done like before. I think the idea of them, that sort of complicity between them, being able to sort of like almost, I mean she says schoolgirls, it's feminine coded, right? This idea of this like almost not necessarily platonic, but like this idea of this relationship between them that's well, I'm just trying not to say gay best friend here, but that's the unavoidable subtext of it all, isn't it? Which I think is quite interesting. It seems like a different sort of approach.
I think it was easy to be dispirited by, very companion casting, but their dynamic seems really cool. And feels fresh. And I obviously, Shooty is a fair bit older, but it doesn't seem to be as sort of patriarchal as you would expect from RTD's previous companion Doctor dynamics.
Russell says, with Millie's auditions, we showed those audition tapes to the BBC and to Disney,
yeah.
And everyone instantly went, Millie.
It's nice to have someone whose nostalgia is for Moffat's run rather than RTD's, because Millie has talked a lot about how her Doctor was kind of Matt Smith and with Amy Pond and all of that. It's nice to be reminded that some people do remember Moffat's era and they liked it. It was cool.
Yeah, that's fun that, she went to the Doctor Who experience as a...
Yeah, before it got dismantled.
Kid, I'm so jealous. It's... when I visited Cardiff, I walked around and I could find like signs pointing to it. I knew it was closed, but they hadn't removed all the signs, and I was so like mournful looking at, go this way and you'll get to the Doctor Who experience, and then no, you don't.
Maybe part of RTD's plan can be bringing it back. That would be nice.
That would be great.
There's a mention, I think, it might have been in the Millie's interview. I think she mentions that someone said to her, like maybe Julie said it, but that Ruby is the sort of character who would go to a charity shop and buy the best looking thing on the rack or whatever. So that seems quite telling in terms of what kind of vision they have of this character. There seems to be something like maybe like a working class kind of idea there. Again, like nothing new for RTD. But also like the idea of her being sort of quite fashion conscious. I almost get Clara vibes from the way she was dressed in those shooting pics with Gemma Redgrave. I got a faintly Clara vibe from this almost like really conscious sense of style. I don't know. I'm just doing the fan brain thing of trying to map things onto previous Doctor Who things, aren't I?
There's one, Oliver, I want to ask what you're about to say in a second. There's just one really weird bit of Millie's interview, not weird from her end, that I just think's very fascinating in 2020s. She says, I remember sitting in a coffee shop over the road from the audition, just feeling really nervous. So I thought, I'm just going to look at my phone to take my mind off it. And there's Russell's Instagram pic of them, all in the office, smiling and going, busy day. I knew I would be walking into that room in a sec. And then, blah, blah, they were lovely. But isn't that so surreal that she's waiting for the audition and she checks her phone and she sees the people she's waiting for? Like right then. That's such a crazy modern thing, I think.
There was a recent BBC Doctor Who Twitter post celebrating Matt Smith as the Doctor, and Millie commented on it, right?
Yeah, she was in the replies.
I just like that interconnectedness.
Yeah,
which I suppose is natural for online younger actors. It's sort of fun. Obviously, both Shooty and Millie have been on the receiving end of some nasty stuff as well, which is the downside. But it is good to, I think, have them around the same campfire.
It's nice to feel the generational shift in the show. We're not always going to be stuck with the same coterie of like middle-aged wilderness years people forever and ever.
Well, not on the acting side, at least.
Yeah, not on the acting side, certainly.
The last thing I wanted to quickly talk about was the 14th Doctor's first story. So the comics, the Liberation of the Dalek comic. We talked about part 1 in our This is the Future conversation. Parts 2 and 3 have since come out. So part 1 was 14 is on the cliff where Jodie regenerated, and he walks into Jodie's TARDIS and he looks at his hand and he's like, it's my old hand. And then he goes to Wembley in 1966 and, yay, football. And then he finds there's a bunch of purple aliens secretly there to watch the game or something, and he's like, no.
How dare they?
How dare you?
Really odd. Sure.
And then a Dalek saucer comes and Daleks exterminate. Aye. What the? So that was part 1. So continuing on, part 2 has, the Daleks are all around, and 14 is like, you're Daleks, you're evil. You've got my attention. What are you doing? And the Daleks are exterminate, exterminate. And the purple guys are like, the Daleks, they've stopped killing everyone. They only care about that man. Never mind. They're not just here at Wembley, they're everywhere. He's right. Let's skip to somewhere else in this time zone. And so then we have this crazy thing of, like, we see the aliens in like an Instagram knockoff.
Telepics.
Posing around various, like they're at the San Francisco bridge, and they're like doing the peace sign, and there's like a Dalek saucer ruining the bridge, and they're like got a bunch of emojis and stuff.
Yeah, that's probably the most interesting part of the story, to be honest, the Instagram feed. It's very odd.
Exterminated followers of fashion that are all posing these purple aliens. And then the TARDIS gets scooped up by Daleks, and then the Daleks all try to exterminate 14.
With a companion inside? New person? Sure.
Yeah, random woman shows up, yeah.
Some woman. And then part 3 opens, and the Dalek extermination didn't work. They try to exterminate 14 a couple of times. And then the purple aliens are off at Mount Rushmore, which is now a big Dalek thing, and they're doing cowboy emojis and crying with laughter emojis. And 14's whirling around Jodie's screwdriver, and he's going, Daleks, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. I want answers. You got to stop invading Earth, guys. We obey. And then they stop, and the purple aliens are at the pyramids, and they're annoyed that the Daleks are going back into the saucer. Hello, why have the Daleks gone? The purple alien says on his comms thing. 14 is buzzing the Daleks, and he's like, wait, you're all like literally identical. That's weird. What's going on with you Daleks? And then the Daleks are like, let's crack open planet Earth. And kaboom, Earth gets cracked open. And 14's, what have you done? And that's our first quarter of liberation of the Daleks. The most interesting thing to me about the comic is that 14 doesn't do any tenisms. There's no Alonzi, there's no well. There's none of that, which I think is interesting.
That may be deliberate.
It is very odd to me how much it's underplaying the extreme weirdness of regenerating into 10 again. But I suppose it's not his first time regenerating into 10 again, so maybe he's used to it.
My impression is are the Daleks like a hologram or like a fake thing that the purple aliens have made for like good Instagram photos or something? That's the vibe I'm getting. What do you guys think?
I think possibly the Earth as well. I think possibly this whole scenario that the Doctor's arrived in might be artificial, hence how the Earth can be blown open and whatever, and the aliens there doing tourism and shit, and the Dalek guns don't work on the Doctor and stuff. Like, it's all fake, and maybe the Daleks have been trapped into this somehow, whatever. That's why it's called Liberation. I don't know.
Liberation. There you go.
It's definitely nodding towards the toy maker, fiction, meta. There's a hint of that, but I'm not sure it's going to connect, really.
As much as RTD was talking about how, this is going to make the 14th Doctor feel more real, this is his first real story in DWM, this is so special. I mean, it doesn't really make anything feel real, because it's just such an insubstantial story. Like the fact that it's so like completely refusing to acknowledge its own circumstances, it feels like it's existing in a vacuum. It feels like it honestly feels in the way that like the John and Gillian comics didn't feel very connected to the TV show. It's just that again.
Yeah.
And I think if you're RTD, you can't say, well, we wanted our era to be represented in the comics for the year before we're on screen, so we just put 10 in it because why not? You can't say that, so it has to, you have to inflate the importance of it a bit. But it really is just a comic, which I suppose the comic has always just been a comic. It's occasionally quite interesting, but usually not.
Well, I think the magazine is always worth reading, but the comic isn't the main draw to me right now. It's the interviews at the moment.
And there's an interview on the comic, obviously way back.
Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah.
That stuff's more interesting, I think, when they're going into the rationale behind it all.
Yeah.
I think fundamentally New Who tends to be character driven, and when you get these little sort of frothy 6-page comics, like, they tend to not be very character driven. They tend to just be what kind of new absurd sights and explosions and bangs and ridiculousness can we put on the next page, and they might be mildly entertaining, but in terms of an extension of the TV show, it doesn't feel very tangible at all.
Yeah, and I think that wraps up our discussion on RTD2 for now. RTDiscourse, RTDisney, information disseminating in Doctor Who fandoms, lesions and legions, confusions over things like characters appearing in different episodes, the Disney of it all, that big producer interview, Doctor Who being sold and that kind of idea, co-productions, building an empire, notes from Disney, viewing activism, where RTD2 came from, RTD being needed, spin-offs and sanctity, Mavic Chen, Kate, Gwilliam, Slug, Ruby, and the comic. All these sorts of things we'd obviously like to hear your thoughts on. Your thoughts on those topics themselves, your thoughts on what we had to say about the topics, your thoughts on maybe stuff we didn't say about the topics. All of that, we always love to read the comments, so please fire away with that. And of course, all this stuff, especially with this series on RTD2 pre-airing, more so than usual, these are very ongoing conversations. These aren't setting out any sort of final opinions or statements or anything. These are very of-the-moment things as our knowledge of RTD2 continues to evolve. So more than usual, these are very ongoing. They're not big declarative theses or anything, which means the stuff you say in the comments we'll pick up and we'll bounce off and we'll run with in future discussions. It's a back and forth in that sort of way, just like we're doing with what we're engaging with. So always love to hear your contributions and what you have to say and what we said, what we didn't have to say, and the stuff we looked at. I guess speaking of that, something we didn't look at because it hadn't happened by the time we recorded most of this conversation was Ncuti Gatwa at Bad Wolf Studios, standing by this big wall that actually said the home of the Whoniverse in it, which maybe vindicates or certainly connects to some of the stuff we were talking about in regards to empire building and to spin-offs. And one more thing I wanted to add is when I was talking about the RTD Empire kind of being 5 shows, because we had the 3 main ones, Doctor Who, Torchwood, the Sarah Jane Adventures, and we had the substantial non-fiction stuff with Doctor Who Confidential, which was a proper show unto its own right, and Totally Doctor Who, also its own show. There's also Torchwood Declassified, which everyone forgets a lot of the time, including me, who's watched it all and appreciated it. Maybe because Torchwood Declassified was shorter than Doctor Who Confidential episodes, or who knows why. But so there was a 6th show if you really want to count it like that. But as always, everything we talked about or didn't talk about and what we looked at, please let us know your thoughts. And also, as always, thank you very much for listening. We really do appreciate it. Cheers.